Good morning, everybody. We're about to get started. Good morning, everybody. This hearing is called to order. This is the public hearing of the City Council Committee on Children and Youth. The purpose of this public hearing is to hear testimony on resolution number 180049. I recognize the presence of a quorum of committee members. Committee members in attendance are Council members Reynolds Brown, Vice Chair of the committee, and Council members Quinones Sanchez. Also joining us are Council members Green, Heenan, and Jones. It's great to have everybody here today, especially such a full room. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. I especially want to thank everyone for coming to this hearing about how unpredictable schedules and inadequate work hours impact the well-being of families, children, and caregivers. This issue is a critical one here in Philadelphia for more than 100,000 of our neighbors, fellow parents, and community members who are doing part-time work in some of the lowest wage areas of the local economy, including food service, retail, and the hospitality sector. Our economy is changing, and it's changing rapidly. And today, huge swaths of Philadelphians are now in a part-time workforce that affords them too few protections and where a lack of standards has allowed for troubling practices that potentially expose parents and caregivers to unsustainable work environments and family lives. The fact of the matter is, for too many people in our city, the deck is stacked against them, and it's stacked against us as a city that strives for better. There is no tax plan that's going to address these needs. They have waited too long for a state that has failed to raise the minimum wage and fought against the fair funding of our schools. It's time to talk about what we can do about this. This issue matters for anyone struggling with work-life balance, and especially for women, for parents and those caring for their own parents, for workers seeking new training and opportunities, for students and returning citizens striving to get their education, and for all of us who understand that stability in work is intrinsically linked to stability in life. It's easy for a lot of us facing seemingly large issues to want to debate immediately into the finer points of policy, and that time is going to come, but not today. Today, we're here to understand the scope of a problem, why it's incumbent upon us as city municipal officials to pay attention to this area, why we can't talk about poverty without talking about the ways in which, intentional or not, people who seek work, who want their education, who want more opportunities, are kept in poverty by systems within our control to address. I'm talking about a mom named Shakira, who came here from Burkina Faso and has a beautiful 3-year-old son. She works part-time for a national chain of upscale grocery stores and gets her schedule for each work week the day before it starts. She hasn't been able to figure out a regular, affordable childcare for her son because of her unpredictable work schedule. And with her tight budget, she can't pay a full week's rate for regular daycare because she knows she's not going to use most of it. And then she'll have to pay for extra. Or Destiny, a single mom with a 14-month-old baby. She works for a big box store as a cashier, and she calls in every single weekend to find out what her work schedule is for that week starting on Monday. And that's also when she finds out how many hours she's going to get for that week. She can't supplement her income with a second part-time job. It's hard for her to figure out rent. And because she's assigned so few hours, she doesn't even qualify for Child Care Information Services funds to help with her child care costs. We already know that this type of scheduling leaves too little time to make arrangements for family needs, let alone to find alternative sources of income. We know how it impacts workers of color by unstable scheduling. And we also know that if we want a vibrant city, we have to have stable working families who are able to put the dollars they earn back into our local economy. The instability and poverty attached to involuntary part-time work holds us back in terms of our own potential as a city. And a growing body of research shows that part-time work statistics back up the poor labor standards that disproportionately affect people of color and immigrant communities. This city has invested so much in early childhood education, in our public schools, in reentry, and in workforce development. But doing so also requires us to challenge the stubborn and ingrained practices that result in on-demand scheduling that drains our communities of choice and opportunity. So we're at a crossroads here, a city which faces the challenges of growing desperation and income disparity, or one in which we can hear the voices of our communities and promise them a fighting chance for a stable life and a home that they can work for. If we care about evictions, about education, adult education, returning citizens, if we care about our millennials, we have to open our ears and hearts to the stories that will be presented today. And I look forward to that conversation. I want to open up by asking my Vice Chair, Chairwoman Reynolds Brown, whether you have any opening remarks.
Good afternoon to guests and visitors and to members of this committee, Councilwoman Gim. On the occasion of the celebration of Women's History Month, I think the time is right and ripe, R-I-P-E, for us to more closely examine this issue. It's one that is not going to go away. The challenge, I believe, will be to find the delicate balance between advocating for those to which Councilwoman Gim has eloquently spoken about, and finding the soft, delicate balance so that small businesses are not negatively impacted by this new ultimate, what I believe will be reality. It's an important dialogue. We know that where we start out is seldom where we end up, but if we don't have the discussion, then there's no progress at all, and that's unacceptable. So I look forward to the dialogue, to the conversation, to the friendly debate, to the, I'm sure we'll be informed as well. And always the beauty of gathering more current, accurate facts, that type of information moves us to a place where we can make a difference in the lives of the women and men that we're talking about. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much. Would any other council members like to make any opening remarks? Councilwoman Sanchez.
I also want to thank Councilwoman Gim for bringing this issue to our attention, and look forward to a very robust conversation. This City Council has been proactive and aggressive in responding to the workforce issues that have existed in our city. We are the largest city with the largest number of poverty in this city, and even as we discuss housing policy, the issue of the problem being a poverty problem often comes up. And I often remind folks that poverty starts with the unpredictability of what we're talking about here today. And I want to encourage folks to be part of this robust conversation and remind folks that whether it was the battles with the hotels, the battle at the airport for the workers, we always found a win-win. And what is a win-win? When we grow the city. And I think that given the climate that currently exists in DC, I think we have an obligation and a responsibility to look at this issue in a very thorough way, and I look forward to all the stakeholders coming forward. And I want to thank the workers who are already feeling the grunt of just what is a public discussion. I want to apologize to all of you that in this day and age, that some of these workers, while we're entertaining a conversation, have already begun to retaliate, as we see in our criminal justice systems and others, where we get further penalized for being poor. And that's a sad day. And that's not why I got elected, and I look forward to this conversation.
And with that, we'll get started. The clerk will now read the title of the resolution.
Resolution 180049, authorizing the Committee on Children and Youth to conduct hearings regarding the impact of unpredictable and inadequate work hours on the well-being of families and examining the effect of unstable work weeks on children and caregivers.
The clerk will now call the first witnesses to testify on the resolution.
Shaheen Wright, Mary Garten, Rob Key, and Tori Price.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Shaheen Wright. I am a long life resident of Philadelphia, a 2016 graduate, a current STEP team coach at Northeast High School, and a member of One Pennsylvania, and also a PetSmart employee. I'm really grateful to council people who called this hearing and those who are here. I know you all are ready to hear the Chamber of Commerce a little later on, but right now, workers are the stories that we're trying to hear. My job at PetSmart isn't a job for extra cash to go out on the weekends. It's how I support my family of 7. My schedule fluctuates anywhere from 10 to 40 hours in a given week. How can I possibly plan, pay for bills, or save money not knowing how much money I'm going to get in my check at the end of the week? My dream is to become a vet, but I had to drop out of school to open my availability to get more hours. Even though I'm not in school anymore, I still don't get enough hours, so, it's the worst of all worlds. A few weeks ago, my paycheck was only $110. How can I expect to pay bills for 7 people? On the top of the changing numbers of hours, the timing of my hours is consistently fluctuating with no regard for what works for me. My manager knows that the first bus that goes past my house to work is at 6:30 in the morning, but yet I'm still scheduled to work 6:30 morning shifts. And when I told her I couldn't afford the cab or an Uber just to go to work for that many of days, she said, well, I guess we'll have to find someone else who has no problem getting here on time. So I had to get up at 5 in the morning, walk about 2 miles to make it there at my 6:30 a.m. shifts. My coworkers and I are expected to can be completely flexible, but our jobs aren't flexible with us. Yesterday, something happened to me that is far too common for retail workers. After 2 weeks of scheduling me for just 10 hours, I told my manager if I couldn't get any more hours, then I would have to resign. She told me not to bother to put in my 2 weeks and to leave right then. It's not right for us to get punished and to even lose our jobs for simply asking to work more. After this hearing, one PA members and me will go down to my store, demand my job back, and ask for the hours I need to survive. Why can't these multi-billion-dollar corporations like PetSmart, they have a 14% tax cut, and they can't afford to pay us or give us fair hours or put enough people on the floor? That's why I'm here to ask City Council to give us a fair work week. These companies aren't going to treat us like humans and out of the kindness of their hearts. I'm going to keep fighting until we have fair hours, fair pay, a predictable schedule, ability to work, and achieve our goals in life. I won't stop until everyone in Philadelphia is able to work regardless of their hours, regardless of what time they can get up in the morning, or regardless of what they have to do to take care of their children. My job is, a formality. I don't have to go to work, but I have to do this work to fight for retail workers. Thank you.
Could you please give your name and then proceed with your testimony?
Okay. Hi, my name is Garten. I'm a member of Rock, Pennsylvania, and I've been a food service worker for 6 years. I'd like to start off by thanking all the council people for taking the time to hear our concerns about our vulnerability in the workplace. Restaurant workers deal with so much mistreatment, income insecurity, and lack of control over our own lives that it's time for us to tell our story. I've worked at restaurants where the schedule came out the night before. I've worked at restaurants where bosses will cut corners by hiring servers. They only have to pay $2.83 an hour instead of paying the support staff that they actually need, which means the tip pool that I depend on gets shared even further. At the restaurant I've worked at before the one that I have now, I never got enough hours, and it was like pulling teeth to get shifts. Like 40% of Philadelphians, my income last year put me below the poverty line. I've had times where I've held off going to the doctor because I didn't get enough hours that week. I've had trouble finding an apartment I could afford, and I've ultimately ended up in a place that makes it hard to get to the restaurants where I could earn the most. That's why restaurant workers need Fair Work Week legislation. For me, it would mean reestablishing a sense of autonomy over my life. It would mean I would be entitled to predictable hours and therefore more predictable and less precarious economic living situation. I would be more secure in my job knowing that I couldn't get punished for asking for time off. And I'd have more time for things like my involvement with ROC. Of course, this legislation is crucial for caregivers and families. And I'm an artist that wants time for my art, but honestly, workers shouldn't need an excuse to have time off. We are people and not robots. Lastly, hospitality workers everywhere would agree that we are not just our job, and we would like the dignity to work towards a healthy work-life dynamic instead of being needlessly at the whim of owners and managers who devalue our time and our humanity. Thank you for your time. It doesn't go unappreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Good afternoon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Key. I work at Target on Cedar Line Avenue, and I've been there for 7 years. I'm also a member of 1PA. Workers like me feel powerless. Our lives are controlled by managers and CEOs that don't know what it's like to be us or to do the work that we do. We're standing up because we deserve better. Yeah, okay. My name is Robert Key. I'm 28 years old. I work at Target on Cedar Line Avenue. And I've been there for 7 years. And I'm also a member of 1PA. Workers like me feel powerless. Our lives are controlled by managers and CEOs that don't know the work that we do and don't know what it's like. We're standing up because we deserve better. When I first worked at Target, I got a lot of hours. When you're training, they'll give you the full-time hours, so you think that's how it's going to be. Then once you work there for a couple of months in, they start cutting your hours. But at that point, you've already worked and spent so much time adjusting and training to the job. What's the point of looking for something else? Even though I was hired to work full-time, I never get the 40 hours I need, even though I consistently ask for more hours. I usually only get 20 to 30. I work in the back room at Target, and they always want us to work faster and faster and do more and more. So there's so much work to do and not enough time. But they still won't give me the hours that I need. At the same time, I see them keep hiring new part-time people to come into the store. Why can't they give me those hours? Because I don't have enough money. I still live with my parents. My paycheck barely covers their bills. On top of that, I gotta pay my own food. I dream of living on my own, of being independent, but I can't afford to save or even get my own car insurance. So I can't drive my car, and I only have to rely on transportation. And as frustrating as my situation is, a lot of my coworkers have it worse. One of them is my colleagues that work at Target. He rarely gets the hours that he needs. He only works 1 to 2 times a week. He has a major injury and needs health care, but he doesn't get the hours that he needs for insurance. And he definitely can't pay out of pocket with so few hours that he gets. I end up lending him money once a month, but I only can spare what I can. That's why workers like me, him, and everyone else in this movement need fair work week. We are people. We have lives, responsibilities. We have lives and responsibilities outside of work, and we deserve to be able to meet those responsibilities. Multi-billion-dollar corporations like Target can give us 40 hours, and our city will be stronger when we can support our families. We need city councils to join cities across the country to pass fair work week. Our lives depend on it. I just want to say one thing, Congressman, we're not trying to take advantage of the system. We want to change. We have families that we need to take care of. That's all we can ask for. We're nice people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you could just stay here, I think some of our council members may have one or two questions. So Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Good afternoon. Let me first thank you as citizens for simply showing up and registering your voice. It matters. To the gentleman that just spoke, your name again?
Robert Key.
Okay, I only asked because I want to be accurate with what's on my sheet here. So you say when you were first hired, you had a lot of hours was your quote. What does that mean? Was that 30 hours a week, 40 hours a week? Help me.
40 hours, almost, because we never get 40 hours. We only get like close to 30, like 40, like 38 or 36.
Okay, so short of a full-time work week typically
Yes.
equals 40 hours.
Yeah.
And you said that you worked there for approximately 7 years, or you're working there for approximately 7 years?
Yes.
And then you said, you mentioned, but you didn't state specifically, how long was it before you were scheduled for part-time? Was it a year later? Was it 2 years later? Was it 3 years later that you moved to part-time? And what is part-time? Is that 15 hours, 20 hours? What specifically?
I'll just below 30 hours.
Just below 30 hours?
Yeah, or they just keep me like that.
Okay. And do you recall how long it was after you completed the full training that your hours changed to just below 30 hours?
I would say probably like a month. It didn't take too long.
Okay. All right, then. Thank you all again for your personal testimony. It's very helpful. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to follow up on the questions that Councilman Brown asked to Mr. Key. When you interviewed and when you completed your application, you were hired as a full-time employee. Was there any time period when they made that transition and said you would no longer be a full-time employee or be a part-time employee?
They never stated that to me. They just, even though I said I want to work full-time, but they just kept me at part-time.
So they never provided any justification of why you were given part-time hours even though you were hired as a full-time employee?
No.
And then you also stated that they were kept asking you to work faster and faster in that limited time period, and they were bringing additional part-time employees into the job site.
Yeah, even right now, it's only mostly 2 members in the back room that work in the morning and sometime in the afternoon. Most of the backroom team members, they all work in this other section in the back room called Ship to Store. And they give all those time over there and not enough for the backroom team members. And, we used to have a lot. Now it's just a little bit. And they expect you to get everything done when there's only like 2 people or 1 person in the morning.
Do you know if there are other employees at Target that were also hired as a full-time employee but only given part-time hours?
No, most of them I talked to, they only get they say they work full-time, but then you ask them, they only get 35 or 38 hours a week.
Okay. In reference to Ms. Garten and Mr. Wright, you both stated you request additional hours. When you stated or made a request for additional hours, was there any type of retaliation against you at all when you made that request? Did you see your hours change either up or down after you made a request for additional hours?
The most recent job where that happened to me, no, I didn't. There were no repercussions, but in the past, it's happened. I used to work at an Outback Steakhouse where when we would ask either for time off or more hours, it would usually just reflect by taking us off the schedule for more time than we had asked.
So I'm going to explore that a little bit. So when you talked about working at a certain retail chain, Outback Steakhouse, and when you've asked for additional hours, the response to that was not to give you more hours, but to reduce your hours?
Yeah.
And was that a pattern that occurred with other employees as well?
I assume so, but it's been about 6 years since I worked there, so It's hard to recall.
Okay. And then as a result of making that request for additional hours, but then losing hours, did you then continue to ask for additional hours?
No, I eventually quit.
Okay. All right. And then, Mr. Wright, you also talked about your desire for additional hours at your current job, and what's been a response in reference to that request, and also what has happened with other employees who made similar requests?
So, when I asked for additional hours, after getting my 10 hours a week schedule. I asked if it would be possible if I could pick up another shift, or, could I get another hours? Because originally the position that I asked for was open, and I said, well, can I just take that position? She said, no, you had an open availability. So I changed my availability to fit the schedule. It was never changed. And then another worker was hired in that position. After I asked again for an hour increase, she said, well, we can bump you up from 10 to 12, and I'm not giving you any more hours other than that.
Okay. And have you still continued to request for additional hours?
I've requested, I've requested many times, could I get more hours, or to even be scheduled one day out of the week that I can do mornings, just to increase those hours that I get, but none of those requirements were met. It seems that a lot of retail workers put in a lot of effort to work with these corporations and to work with management to better themselves or to get the hours that they need, even, cutting their own hours in some places just so they can get more in another. But nothing is ever met.
Okay. And when you've asked for additional hours, was there any negative impact to your hour schedule after asking for additional hours?
Yes, after asking for additional hours, my hours would just so happen to go down. If I am, like I said, I work from anywhere from 10 to 40 hours a week. Average, I work from 25 to 30. And it was never, if I would ask, I would go from 10 to 30 to 15 to 20. And those hours would fluctuate every time I would ask for more, or if I asked, could I change my availability or to move to a different position.
Mm-hmm. And was that a pattern with other employees as well? If they had asked for more hours, they may have reduction of hours and going
While
forward?
working in retail, yes.
Okay. And also one other quick question for the panel. How far in advance were your hours scheduled?
My hours at least were given either a day or two before. If I didn't make it to that, if I wasn't scheduled for that day to see my schedule, then I either had to make it there to go there on a day off, or I would see my schedule the next day, which would be the day before the week started.
There's no standardization of when a schedule is released in food service, so at all of the jobs that I've had, they've always been released at different times, whether that be the night before, so like usually Sunday, so people who are working on Monday might not know, especially if they don't have a set schedule. But some restaurants that I've worked at have been great, and it would just be nice to have a schedule 2 weeks out in advance so that you can make doctor's appointments and go to school and have the autonomy of living your life outside of your workplace.
There's no problem with my job. They let you know 2 weeks in advance of how your schedule is going to be, and they do put the availability that you put in, but sometimes they don't. And the one thing I don't get is what they do is they get one person, one of the ETLs. ETLs are like the managers of the store, but now they're like the second in command. So when one of them is scheduled to do your schedule, if they leave, go to vacation or something, someone else does it, and then they mess with your hours. And then, let's say, for example, I go to school. I go in the morning. I scheduled not to come in the morning. I'm only going to come in at night. When someone else does my schedule, they mess it up. Either you can, tell them, hey, that's what you can do. You just tell them, I can't make it that day. I go to school. They'll either tell you, go find someone else to take that hours, or just call out, which I don't understand. If all our technology today, they can't look at our schedule and see, well, Rob, he can't work in the morning, so I'm not going to touch that. I don't understand that. Like, they should see that right away for a backroom team or any team member that works in Target.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Yes,
Councilmember
Councilman Green's
Reynolds.
question has triggered another for me. So we're listening to testimony representing Target, major corporation, international corporation. I need to know the nature of the other two businesses. How many employees are at the other two businesses that of the testifiers who've spoken, under 10, under 25, so that we get apples. This may be oranges, but it may be apples and apples. So help us out.
At the restaurant that I mentioned in my testimony where I wanted more hours and it was like pulling teeth.
Pull the mic closer so we can hear you.
The restaurant that I was at where I mentioned in the testimony that I wanted more hours, there was probably only about 10 or 15 employees at that restaurant.
Okay.
But I've experienced it at restaurants larger than that and
At
smaller.
Chains? Have you experienced it at Chains?
Yes, at
Okay.
Outback Steakhouse. Like
All
I
right, then,
mentioned.
please.
Sure.
At my job, there are only, in my position, the position that I'm qualified for, that I've been trained for, there are only 4 to 5 people.
I see. Do you have any idea how large the business is? Meaning the total number of employees?
In my store, or?
Yes,
In my store, there are around 30 employees.
I see.
Yes.
Okay, then, that's helpful as we try to gather the information. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
And Mr. Wright, you work at PetSmart, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
and-
it is a chain?
It is a
Yes,
chain.
it is a chain.
Okay.
And yesterday, I was told, after letting management know that I couldn't do the 10 hours, and I told her, well, something will have to change. I may put in my 2 weeks if I can't find any more hours, or if my situation can't be helped. And that was Friday. Monday, yesterday, I came into work. After my shift was over, my manager walked up to me and said, there's no need for your 2 weeks. You can leave now.
Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Wright, I'm so sorry to hear that, in part because one of the things that I think we're trying to let people know is that you talked about how your work schedule changed from anywhere between 10 to 40 hours. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you could get 10 hours one week and then up to 40 hours and weeks down the road, but you don't know when that is. You don't know a total number of hours worked per month. Is that correct?
Yes, and they stressed at my job that we are to put in availabilities for anything that we need. So,
Could you explain that again? You had to do what?
So we're told to put in a paper for an availability to make sure that everything is correct. And on the sheet that we're supposed to fill out, it states that what were the hours that you would want to work minimal. And I stated to my manager and on the form that I turned in that the minimum hours that I would like to work would be 20. And she said that wouldn't be a problem. But yet I'm getting 15 and 10 a week, and I have to support a number of people in my house. So with 10 hours a week, I can't even pay my phone bill. So when I have to pay for food and pay for rent and pay for certain things like that, there's no money. Bills come regardless if I don't have the money or not. So if I don't have the money to do anything because I'm not getting the hours that I was promised, then it makes it very hard, close to impossible, for me to plan anything, to make sure that my goals are met, because I have to come in and work erratic schedules, fluctuating hours, and nothing is consistent.
Yeah, well, I wanted to express my thanks. I mean, one of the things that really struck me about your testimony was also that you try to give back as much as you can. You handled the drum line at the high school that you graduated from. You're taking care of your family, which includes your mother, is that correct?
Yes.
And younger siblings?
Right, so I take care of my mother and younger siblings, and also help support another family that lives with us.
And that's a lot, and we're grateful for that. And I think, one of the questions that I had is also that it's my understanding that because you didn't have a stable work schedule, you actually had to drop out of school. Is that correct? Can you talk a little bit about how that struggle was to balance work and going back to school?
Yes, so I wasn't getting any sleep. I would get up for school in the morning to go in the morning shifts, and then go out to work at night school, or if I didn't have a morning shift, I would try and plan school to go in the mornings. So I was never getting any sleep. I would come home, I would, study, or I would make sure that everything was done for the next day, and I was getting maybe 2 or 3 hours of sleep between the week. So I was just running myself thin through everything, and it was just too much for me to handle, along with not getting the money that I need for my house. So if I don't have the money that I need for my house, financial aid only covers a partial part of my college. So I don't want to be in debt with $30,000 in loans. So I didn't take out any loans because I knew I couldn't pay them back. So I have to pay out of pocket for classes. I have to wait for financial aid to come through. And I also have to talk to my managers where I can get more hours to work, but also say, hey, well, I'm going to school in the mornings. Can there be a possibility that you cannot schedule me in the mornings so I can do that? And the response would be, this is the hours that I can give you. If you don't like those hours, then we can find someone else to work for you. And then I would be in that situation.
And one other, I'm sorry to hear that. One other area that I wanted to ask you a little bit about was also like in this, 24-hour world of commerce that we're in right now, you had to open up extremely early. And you mentioned that sometimes you had to get there, you might be scheduled for a 6:30 opening before some of the transportation systems would run.
Yes.
So what would you have to do in that particular situation?
I would have to either pay the money to take a cab or an Uber, or I would have to walk. And it's a 2-mile walk from my house to my job.
You would walk 2 miles in the morning?
I would walk 2 miles in the morning just so I could get there on time. If not, maybe a couple minutes late because I have to walk. And that's in rain, snow, cold, heat, whatever the day is. I have to walk because I have to get to work because my schedule is not being able to fit my life. With me putting out as much work as I do in that store and the support that I bring and the experience that I bring, I would think that they would work with me with a schedule saying, maybe 30 minutes later, you can come in. Or, maybe let me not put you on a schedule for the mornings and have you come in mid-shift or to closing. I have no problem working with mid-shift to closing, but that was not acceptable for the manager. She said, you are to do these hours. If not, then you don't have those hours.
And then you said again that at different points in time, you might get 24, 48 hours notice for a schedule that would start for that week.
Exactly. If I was to do exactly what they wanted, to work the morning shifts and not complain about anything, I would get the hours that I needed. And that would put strain on me. It would put strain on my family because I would have to come home tired. I also have to cook for people. I have to do a lot of things to support 2 families in one house. So when I'm coming home tired, or if I'm not getting the hours that I need, it all affects not just me, but a lot of the people in my family.
And one other question for the panel. If you got called in and scheduled for hours, even though the schedule is given to you, would you see those hours change at all during the week? Like could shifts get canceled even though you're scheduled for them? Could you be asked to work later than what was already scheduled?
Yeah. That happens all the time. Right now I work at a place with a paper schedule. It's not released on email or anything. And the owner will cross off your name if she needs to change things and not tell you. So every day when I go into work, I have to make sure that I look at the schedule to make sure the hours that I have are still there. That's not to say that it's an incredible place to work, but if there was standardization across, or legalization, I guess, on how notice for scheduling, that would make things helpful.
Thank you.
They won't have a problem. It used to be a problem before, if you call out, they'll make a big deal out of it. But sometimes you're busy. But now they kind of shy away from that, and thank God they don't do that no more. But I know they do that to other employees because they complain about that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wright, would you see your schedule change during the week, even though it was already established?
Yes, there's been a couple of times where I'll go to like Mary. I have to constantly look at my schedule day to day to see what may change or it's a paper schedule. So if I go and then it's crossed out and I ask about it, they'll be like, oh, well, we switched your schedule with the person that can't work that day. So you're gonna work another day, and I guess that's fine with you, right? And I wouldn't have any say in that, because if I chose not to, I wouldn't get my day nor her day. So I would just be left with less hours. There's even been cases where I've worked 2 shifts in one day because I didn't know that someone else was crossed off the list and that was added on to mine. I've worked 11-hour shifts. I've worked 12-hour shifts from 6:30 in the morning to maybe 3 or to 5 or to 6, just to get everything done, because I was never notified of a schedule change or even asked if I was okay with taking someone else's schedule, or if, how that would be brought up to me. It's always, well, this is what it's here. You can look at it whenever you want. The schedule's there. They're always telling us the schedule's there. If you choose to look at it or not, that's up to you. But there will be changes, and they're never a notice with those changes. They don't call or I say anything.
And my last question is, do you think that you're unique? Like, are you the only employee at PetSmart? Are you the only employee at Outback or at Target that has these concerns?
I don't think I'm unique. I think this is happening to a lot of retail workers. I think this is happening everywhere. But people are made to think it's their fault. People are made to think, you must be doing something wrong, so this is why you're not getting the hours. So when you're put into a position where you're not getting anything, people usually tend to be quiet, and they don't rile up management because they're afraid to lose their job or to have less hours, and you're made to be put in fear. Sure. These management are made to make retail workers say, you're not going to come up to me. You're not going to ask me about more hours because I pay you. I give you your hours.
Thank you.
I can tell you what you can do.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Councilmember Reynolds.
You covered a couple of my remaining questions. Did I hear you say you work for Outback?
I worked at Outback Steakhouse 6 years ago. That was my example.
And the
as a chain.
practices were similar?
Yes.
So at the end of the day, I've heard from three chains that have these practices. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to this panel for your testimony. Are there any other questions from my council members? Thank you so much for your testimony. We appreciate it. The clerk will now call the next witness. The clerk will now call the next witnesses.
President Patrick Eiting and President Wendell Young.
Testing 1, 2. Yeah, I might have to share that.
Good afternoon, President Eiting. Thank you so much. If you could just introduce yourself and then proceed with your testimony.
Absolutely. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members and fellow witnesses. My name is Pat Eiting, and I'm proud to say I serve as president of the Philadelphia Council AFLCIO, representing 150,000 working families here in Philadelphia. I also would like to let you know that I come here today after having a meeting with our executive board, who has given me full support to bring our message to this hearing today. From my perspective as a labor leader, and I been doing that for a few years. Working people are forced to work for stagnant hours and stagnant wages and deteriorating conditions. It is with that in mind that Philadelphia Council has elected to support the campaign for a fair work week. That's better. We believe strongly in the dignity of work and that all workers, and I want to emphasize that, all workers deserve to be treated fairly in their workplace. The initiative fits into what we believe Philadelphia is about, a wonderful city where we take care of each other. That's why this council has tackled paid sick leave, wage theft, and most recently pay disparity based on gender and race. To demonstrate the council's commitment to this issue, I have assigned our campaign manager, Danny Bowder, to this campaign. Danny will be calling members of City Council, and if you haven't already heard from him on this issue, you will soon. I want to stay off the text for a minute and just say that I believe, and we believe, this is a great opportunity for labor, business, and the community to come together to help people who need our help, to have a decent and fair opportunity to make a decent wage, a decent living, and to be able to take care of their families. I want to thank City Council Committee for inviting me to speak and giving me the opportunity to provide labor's perspective on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, President Eiding. President Young?
We're going to share the mic. Councilwoman Gim and members of City Council, thanks for inviting me here today to talk about this. I'm Wendell Young with United Food and Commercial Workers Local 1776. You have my prepared testimony. I'm not going to reread it into the record. You have that for your own review. I want to talk a little bit about what we just heard from those young people before us in the panel. Our union represents 22,000 people. Overwhelming majority of them work in retail throughout Pennsylvania, most of them right here in the 5-county Philadelphia area, 8,000 of them here in Philadelphia. I know retail. We know retail. I grew up in retail. My first job in retail was at 5th and Luzerne in a Penn fruit store. And despite the fact that there was no mistaking my name relative to someone else with the same name, my manager tried to screw with my schedule repeatedly. But I had a union contract, and I could go back to my shop steward, my union rep, and make sure justice was served. Overwhelming majority of retail workers in this city don't have that kind of protection, and they need your help with this. The stories you just heard are just the surface. It goes so much deeper. And everything they said, I experienced even in a union environment. But again, as a shop steward and later as a union rep my entire life, we were able to, help people and rescue them from those kind of corporate policies and managers. And yes, it is corporate policy. You'll hear from people later, I'm sure. You've already heard from some of them about how unfair this would be to the business community. The business community, for the most part, doesn't care about these people. They think of them as disposable. If they did, they would pay them better and they would treat them better. You don't have to look far. You can Google it, but you can research the city's own tax records. All these big corporate retailers, Target, Walmart, all of them. Look at the turnover. Walmart last year employed about 1,300,000 people, and they hired close to 700,000 people. And that's the pattern year after year after year. They're replacing more than half their workforce every year. And they replaced them at barely more than minimum wage with the same kind of hours issues you just heard about. As long as there's been retail in this country, schedules have been used as a tool to control people, to keep wages down by turning people over. They'll hire someone, make commitments. They'll even give them a lot of hours in the beginning, maybe even a little better wage than they had at their last retail job. But the longer people stick around, because most retail employees are between about 15 and 20 years old when they're hired, most, right? Now, some stay, but most are that old. So as their needs grow, as they get out of high school and into their 20s, they don't want them to stay. And the easiest way to get rid of somebody, because they're worried about an EEOC suit or some other issue, the easiest way to get rid of somebody is just change their schedule. Change their schedule when they know they need to be at the other job they had to take. Change their schedule when they know they rely on public transit and they can't get there. Change their schedule when they know during their childbirthing years they need to be home taking care of the baby. That's what they do. Now, we have enough problem in our own shops, keeping an eye on it. It's why we have a large staff and over 300 shop stewards. And there's still people even in our shops that try and get away with it. But where there's no law and people don't have the benefit of representation, they need the help that comes from this bill. You know, back in the old days, just a few years ago when I was 16 and started that Penn Fruit, managers were supposed to do their schedules on Wednesday, tinker with them on Thursday, and post them on Friday for a work week that started Sunday. And it's not much different almost everywhere, coast to coast in this country today. The difference is they have far better tools. Most of the companies are owned by big corporations that set budgets and parameters weeks and months in advance, usually a quarter or more in advance. Those managers have predictive scheduling tools, thanks to computers, that they know well in advance what hours they're being budgeted and all their and who they have on their payroll. They don't have to put those schedules up the day before, and they don't have to change them except for one reason. They want to move somebody out, or they want to take advantage of little changes in the market day to day to maximize profit. It's not a matter of making profit. You can't tell me Target, Costco, Walmart, PetSmart aren't making a profit. This is about maximizing profit at anybody's expense. They don't care about these people. They think they're disposable, and they need your help. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you both for your testimony. And you do represent a tremendous amount of people and fight the fight every day and the struggle to keep people honest. You give an inch, you take a mile. I mean, I think that's human nature, especially when it comes to the almighty dollar. But, you know, from what I'm hearing from you two is that it's a policy decision, not a technology decision, not a financial decision, that it's a policy decision. So in your opinion, some of the smaller retails that have a lot of turnover, I mean, you used one example where, you know, 700,000, more than half of its workforce is turned over, so there's a reason for that. All right, and the reason I'm sure is that they don't treat their workers fair, and they play around with the scheduling. But they have the scheduling tools. All right, so would you think that some of the smaller retail chains, national chains that are right here in the city of Philadelphia, that Philadelphians, you know, patronize and Philadelphians go to, do you think they have the tools for predictive scheduling or, you know, some sort of advanced scheduling notice?
So I think every chain, let's just start with that, whether the store represented in the neighborhood is a small store or not, has scheduling tools and uses them. They have predictive scheduling tools. But the thing about the tools is that made it easier to predict and schedule in advance. Years ago, when I was a kid working in the stores, they were also given budgets well in advance. They compared the same store sales from the year before, from the quarter before. There's some cyclical differences from different times of the year. You know, July and August are a little different than May and March and April and May. January and February are a little slower. So those cyclical things happen in there, but they're familiar with that. The only store that might not be familiar with it, and I think it's in your district, would be the new Ammon ShopRite at Bridge and Harbison. Right? So that store there, they don't know what their sales are going to look like in the next week or two or three because they just opened. They don't know what their business is going to look like.
Hiring 300 people.
I was just going to add that.
That's
With
right.
300 new jobs there. And even there, those folks have a good idea next week, and the week after, and the week after, what their schedules are going to look like. But that's an example where they got to test to see where their sales are going to come in because it's a brand new store. But once you're up and running, and you've been there month after month, year after year, you have very good predictability of what your sales are going to look like and what your schedule requirements were. In the old days, those managers didn't start from scratch on those schedules where I worked on Wednesday on their day off and do their schedules. They were just basically rolling forward, looking at the previous year's pattern for that time of year, thinking about any changes that are going on, weather forecasts, things like that, and just modifying it a little bit. And right now, most managers know well in advance, not 1 or 2 days in advance, weeks in advance, what their budget for hours for that period is. And that's what it all is based on. Because if they don't make budget for hours, they get dinged in their bonuses in the chain retail world. It's that simple. And then they aren't, they're out. So they manage that week to week, month to month, based on numbers that were provided them well in advance. That's the way it works in retail. But it's not just about, as your legislation speaks to, it's not just about when the schedule goes up. You know, you heard stories here about people that are told when they, and you may not have heard all these here, you will hear them before this is over, you know, they show up for work after juggling kids and family and other jobs in school and are told, we don't need you, go home. That's wrong. There's always something to be done in that store, right? Or being told what you just heard that young man talk about, oh, someone else needed your schedule, so we're sending you home. All right, that'll happen in a union shop too, but there's provisions to make sure we find another schedule for that person. All right, it'll only happen if the other person had seniority. We have pages and pages and pages of language that go much further than what's here, and I'm not advocating for that here. We still want people to understand the value of paying union dues after all, right? But what you have here helps people get treated decently. To be able to know that if I'm scheduled and I make the time to get to work, that I'm actually going to work. There is no reason to send somebody home mid-shift simply because it's slow. And then they're going to lose money over that, and let alone they might not have a way of getting home at that time of day. And you know, a lot of retail workers, because of the nature of so many of them are part-time, they have to work other jobs, sometimes 2 other jobs. And you know what it's like for someone who's depending on both or all 3 of those job schedules to work the way they were told it's going to work, and then one manager who doesn't care says, you got to be here or I'm going to fire you. So now you got to pick which job are you going to get fired from, right? Which job? This is not right. And you know, we live in a city that's built on a better foundation that we have the power to fix this. We should fix it. Have retail workers treated the same way as those managers and those executives want to be treated. And one last thing. For those council members, I'm certain it's the ones that aren't here, that are under a lot of pressure from the retailers. Those managers, those executives, they likely don't live in a city, or a few of them do. These people do, and they vote. There's a lot more of them.
Are there any questions from my council members?
Madam
President
Chairman,
Iden?
I'd like to address Councilman Heenan's question, because I think, I certainly am not going to try to override what my partner here said, but the whole term of manager is a misnomer. Because if you're in business, whether it's construction, running a store, running a box store, whatever it is, you get paid to be a manager to handle those things. And part of handling that thing is scheduling. And half of the people that are doing this don't know what they're doing, and because they have the will and the want to just take on people who have no answer for their pushing around, they're able to do that. And what we have to do is make a manager be a manager. Do your job. And I would tell you that in construction, if the foreman of that job isn't a good foreman, you're going to have all kinds of problems on that job. You'd have people getting hurt and everything else. The same thing happens with a store. They're put into a position as a manager. Half of them should be fired because all they're doing is taking care of people. They're not managing anything. So if the corporate people who run these organizations can't put guidelines down for managers, I think we have to do it. And I think if we take this message to folks that are in business in Philadelphia, at whatever level they are, and sit down and frame this out for them, what's happening to human beings in the city of Philadelphia. I think we'll have a collaborative effort on this, and we don't have to worry about those folks that don't live here. We'll make sure we can move things for the people who need somebody to do something for them, and we should start that today.
Thank you so much, President Ihan. Thank you. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank both of you for your testimony this afternoon, excuse me. Mr. Young, I want to kind of explore a little bit based on your comments earlier. From a business perspective, organizations, corporations, they have planning and forecasting in reference to the dollars, and they have certain goals they need to make based on projections. And so you were talking a little bit about the intersection between the goals and targets and projections of revenue versus scheduling. And I wanted to kind of explore a little more and get some perspective on that and how the scheduling is used from your perspective to make those numbers. And if you could provide a little more detail about that.
So what most retailers, I would say every big corporate retailer uses, and others. I mean, I'm aware of small independent retailers that also use it. It just depends on how, the size of the organization, what sophistication level of the system. They're all pretty much the same. They're often referred to as, predictive scheduling tools. They come under different names. Different companies market it differently. But what they do is they look at what they expect their sales to be. They look at what they want the labor budget to be in terms of how many hours. Most retailers will even break it down by department because the sales are going to be different in different departments, different times a year. For example, in supermarkets, your summer fruits are going to be a little different. They're a little more labor intense. During that high peak period, you're going to put a little more time and effort into your produce aisle. Different times a year, especially around holidays, you're going to have more time in the bakery. Same with meat. So these things are all built into that model, and they tell the regional and or the actual stores, how much budget they're going to have and what they're allowed to schedule. And every retailer pretty much schedules to the bone. And then they rely on being able to call people up and say, I need you here. And if you don't respond to those calls, I'm talking about outside a union contract environment, they're going to get rid of the people. A lot of these people have experienced that. You're at another job, you're in a class, as one person testified, you're home taking care of a child because that's the day you thought you were home, and they call you and say, hey, it's busier than expected, I need you. So they use the scheduling to minimize costs, based on the dollars they expect to be coming through each department and each store, and they want those managers to schedule as thin as possible and then pull people in as needed. Likewise, if for some reason the business is lower than they had predicted, they want to be able to send people home. And they don't care what bill that person has. They don't care whether they're living because it's their first chance to try and get out of a hole, if they're living in a boarding house here in the city and they got to pay their rent every night and they're sending them home, they don't have rent to pay. I mean, that's how it is for some retail workers starting. It is a tough environment to work in. Some people don't think retail's tough. Yeah, you go work in one of our convenience stores or supermarkets at night. Our members work where the food, the drugs, and the cash are, right? And we've had too many of them shot, stabbed, pistol whipped, and killed. It's tough work. And you want to screw with somebody that's been around a long time, maybe an older woman, and tell her all of a sudden, and this is an actual case I had to go after a manager for in a union environment, telling a near 60-year-old woman in a very difficult inner city neighborhood who's used to coming in every day during the day at a decent hour and going home before dark because she couldn't drive, had to rely on walking and public transit, that in a really bad neighborhood, now she's going to walk home at 9 o'clock at night by herself. That guarantees that woman's going to quit rather than become a legacy cost to them in pension and health care and all that. Now, the union, we were able to change that instantly. But the people you heard testify earlier and others you're going to hear, they don't have that. They don't have that. They need you. They need you to help them.
Thank you.
So based on your perspective, because of certain projections and goals that need to be met.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the beginning.
Based on your perspective and certain goals that may need to be met, if they're not meeting certain goals, they may play games with the schedule to reduce their labor costs in order to increase revenue and reduce expenses. And
that's part of it. Part of it's control also.
Right.
Part of it's in control. They decide who they want, who they don't want, whether they do all that stuff you heard about before or not, and they also keep what's called the average earned rate low. By forcing a lot of turnover, they keep the average earned rate low. They make sure that people don't stick around long enough to take advantage, if they could even afford it, the benefit plans or end up in the pension plan. Then they don't get accused of discriminatory practices. They use it when people start to, your expectations of what to earn when you're 16 is different than when you're 19 and you're 22 and 25. And they don't want those folks sticking around saying, I want to make this a better place, for however you choose to do that. And I expect more pay and better benefits. They'd rather show them the door, and the easiest way to do it, give them a schedule that's unrealistic, unfair, and they can't make, and they're out the door. Like you heard some people testify here. It's exactly what they're doing.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
I would be remiss not to go on the record to thank you for your testimony, but more importantly, your testimony punctuates my opening comments, in that it's through this process that we learn new terms like predictive scheduling tools that are available should a corporation opt to take advantage of that type of tool, and then average earned rate low. Was that the terminology? Yep. It's this type of process that really informs us and better informs us about why this legislation is so important. So I thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. The clerk will now call the next panel.
Pastor Billy Thompson, Dr. Tony Damon, Aaron Blair, and Tori Rice.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for being here. We welcome you here. If you could just start with your name and introduce yourself, and then proceed with your testimony. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Pastor. Welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Pastor Billy Thompson. I am pastor of the Adonai United Baptist Church, and I am speaking on behalf of the Evening Baptist Ministers Conference of Philadelphia and vicinity. The Evening Baptist Ministers Conference is happy to support the Fair Work Week Philadelphia initiative. It seeks to provide a more predictable work schedule for 130,000 Philadelphians. As faith leaders, we are called to deliver the truth, no matter how inconvenient. As the leader of a congregation charged with the duty of providing spiritual guidance to our congregants, we see firsthand the struggles our families face. People come to their faith leaders in search of solace, peace, and direction. And we strive to provide spiritual guidance while not forsaking the external issues that cause the crises. Sometimes those external issues are within our control, but many times they are not. Our places of worship aspire to offer the support that our congregants need, and those needs are diverse. Some come looking for a letter of recommendation for employment or schools. Others come looking for food that will help them make it to payday. We make every attempt to support our congregants and the communities that we worship in. It has become clear that charity is not enough to ease the pain that 130,000 of the poor working families in our cities constantly face. These workers are not who the media depicts them as. These are people who show up to work every day, simply hoping to do right by their families. Despite showing up every day, they are unable to make ends meet. From week to week, they battle and attempt to navigate unforeseen schedule changes provided by their employers. They struggle to find safe places to send their children when called in at a moment's notice. They pray about getting enough hours just to pay their bills. James 4:17 says, "So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." Cities across the country have already undertaken this challenge of giving workers the basic dignity to know when and how much money they will be making. Lawmakers across the country who know better have done better. The corporations building their economies on the backs of poor black and brown people now realize that time is up. Their time is up in New York City. Their time is up in San Francisco. And their time is up in the entire state of Oregon. The Chamber of Commerce will tell you that it can't be done. But it is written. It is done. Target, Walmart, Starbucks, they're not in danger. Our people are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pastor. I just want to acknowledge Councilman Squilla. Thank you very much for being here. Welcome, Principal Damon. If you could just introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Tony Damon, and I have been the proud principal of Morrell Dobbins CTE High School since 2012. For me and my 600 students, Dobbins is home. Over 95% of my students are low income, and over 90% identify as Black and Latino. While many of you know me, many others may only know of me. I am known for fighting for our children. When the state decided to cut $1 billion from Pennsylvania children, I stood up. I made it clear that robbing our children of their constitutional right to an education would not be tolerated. I lobbied at the state and sometimes city to put our children first. There are many people that believe that principals should stay in their schools and out of the political fray. But as the leader of a community school, I believe that community institutions are our community, I believe that our community institutions, our schools are community institutions, and if our communities are suffering, then our students and their ability to learn also suffers. That is a political reality that I refuse to tolerate. As the school's leader, I am entrusted with the education and well-being of my students, and I know that their well-being extends beyond the walls of our school. I am here today to talk about the direct role that the inhumane business practices have on the success of our schools. Many people today have covered the data around this issue. 130,000 workers in the poorest big city in America are subject to low-wage, part-time work with little to no advance notice in scheduling. I'd like to share some data of my own. When schools, families, and community groups work together to support learning, children tend to do better in school. They stay in school longer and like school more. The research on parent involvement over the past decade has found that regardless of family income or background, students with involved parents are more likely to attend school regularly, earn higher grades and test scores, show improved behavior, and graduate and go on to post-secondary. The data is clear. Reams of data support the need for parental engagement. There are millions of people who believe that parents are the reasons our schools struggle. It is easy to blame parents. It is more difficult to examine the root cause of our schools' challenges. Hundreds of students and their parents struggle to meet their basic needs. Some believe that these parents live off the system and don't work. But I know many of these parents who go to work as often as they possibly can to provide for their children. They struggle to keep the lights on. They struggle to pay their phone bills. They struggle to stretch food until their next paycheck. They struggle with shut-off notices and evictions. And in this struggle, there are trade-offs. When parents of my children are struggling, my children struggle in school. They struggle to concentrate. They struggle to regulate their emotions. They struggle to focus on schoolwork. How many of us could say that we'd be great at our job while knowing that we were returning to a house without lights at night or heat in the winter? These parents are all around us. They are helping us navigate the aisles in Target. They prepare our coffee at Starbucks. They wait on us at Chili's and Fridays. And as an educator and a mother, I cannot ignore their suffering. It is easy for us to throw our hands up and say that we can do nothing. We can do something. We can help our schools, our children, our parents by ensuring that they are treated with the basic dignity and respect. The fact that this committee is even exploring the issue is a step forward. It means that some are acknowledging the problem. But acknowledging a problem is not enough. Our leaders are strong enough to pass laws that give people notice of their schedule and stable hours. It will pay off. It will pay off in the amount of time my teachers spend trying to track down phone numbers that are disconnected because parents couldn't pay. It will pay off in the number of desperate calls to get from constituents. It will pay off in our schools by allowing parents to attend important meetings and report card conferences, to join school advisory councils as well. It will pay off in safer schools and better academic progress. Advance notice of schedules and predictable hours comes down to a basic question of decency, respect, and fairness. It is fair for people to get the opportunity to get ahead. It is fair to believe that people have a right to work and feed their family. It is fair to ask billion-dollar businesses to give people an idea of when they need to work and how much they will get to work. I believe the answer is clear.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Ms. Blair?
Might need to scooch in a little here. Hi, my name is Erin Blair. I'm here today as a public health nurse who works with first-time moms as they transition into parenthood until their children's second birthdays. Socioeconomic status is one of the greatest predictors of health. And yet, employment is not viewed as a public health issue, and employment in our country is currently a public health crisis. Many of the issues that were presented in the testimony leading up to me testifying addressed several of the issues the families that I work with face every day when they are returning to employment after delivering their babies or facing while they're pregnant and maintaining employment. So I would like to speak directly to the issues affecting public health and employment and young families that are trying to work their way into the employment market. Over the last 9 years as a home visitor, I've observed the lives of the families I serve getting harder and harder. When I first started, I noticed that a lot of my families would piecemeal together multiple jobs that allowed them to be able to keep their lights on and keep them in houses. And a transition began to occur. With the introduction of these scheduling robots, my families no longer dealt with a human manager who was able to be flexible with their schedules based on what their family's needs were, their doctor's appointments, or other things. And they began to be asked to, when they started employment by many major large employers, to be available for 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week, in order to be able to get that job. That's a lot to ask of someone. Sorry. So a lot of the families that I work with are dependent on public health benefits, temporary assistance for needy families, SNAP, or the Food Nutrition Assistance Program, WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, and other public health benefits that allow them to stay healthy. Along with those benefits come many regulations that families have to meet in order to continue to receive those benefits. CCIS, Child Care Assistance Programs, have a mandated number of hours that women must work in order to maintain that benefit. When my families have flexible scheduling, where they're sometimes working 4 hours a week and sometimes working 40 hours a week, they jeopardize the child care assistance that allows them to attend the jobs that they got through the career services that the City of Philadelphia provided them. Those families are mandated to attend career services after delivering a child. They have to return to the workforce if they are receiving cash assistance. At the time that they return to the workforce, if they are not able to maintain the correct number of hours or make it to their county assistance office visits, they lose the benefits that keep them employed. It's an endless cycle. It's a game of chutes and ladders. I watch family after family get so close to getting to that golden ring of moving off of public assistance benefits just to have the rug pulled out from under them and to start back at square one. Chronic stress is something that relates to public health in a very serious way. During pregnancy, when women experience high levels of chronic stress, the hormones associated with chronic stress pass the placenta and affect their unborn fetus. They affect the brain development specifically, oftentimes affecting the brain stem. That can relate to lifelong issues with behavior, social emotional regulation disorders, asthma, and a multitude of other chronic health issues. So that is to say, a baby's experience in the womb, experienced by their mother, related to her employment and stress around economic circumstances, may still be affecting that baby when that baby is 60 years old. Pregnant women experiencing high levels of stress are more likely to deliver prematurely and experience perinatal depression. Adverse childhood outcomes are strongly related to perinatal depression and prematurity. So, as a home visitor, I'm impacted by insecure scheduling in that I schedule visits to come out and see the families that I work with. This week alone, I've had 4 canceled visits. They were canceled the same day or the day before for my moms that were able to let me know. They were canceled because they were called into work or scheduled for work last minute, or they were scheduled, their schedule changed and they had to work until 4 a.m. and were not able to be awake for a 9 a.m. visit when we were scheduled to see each other. This is constant for the families that I work with. And I'd like to share one example. I have a young mom that I work with who returned after 6 weeks after delivery to work at a 24-hour pancake joint. She was successfully breastfeeding her infant, fully breastfeeding, which is hard to do. And since she returned to her employment, she's begun supplementing with formula. as a direct result of inflexible schedules provided by her employer last minute. If you're pumping breast milk and trying to have an adequate supply for your infant available for them to be able to work, you need to know how many hours you're going to be kept at your job. This young mom, she's 19 years old. She was a straight A student in school, and she's working her way to get into college, but unfortunately, her employer won't allow her the flexibility to be able to be successful as a student. She often works until 4 a.m. and is supposed to return to work for an 11 or 12 a.m. shift. It takes her an hour to get to and from work. Imagine how few hours that leaves for sleep. And she has a brand new baby, a baby that's only 3 months old at this point. She spends every waking hour she can bonding with her baby because she knows her baby needs that. The baby's sleep patterns had been well established prior to her return to work and these erratic schedules. Now that infant, as soon as mom comes home, is bright-eyed and ready to spend time with mom and has stopped sleeping regularly. Sleep is a huge impact on infant brain development. It also has a huge impact on maternal depression and maternal health. Pregnant women often face discrimination, and though we have rules that prevent women from being discriminated against because they're pregnant, it doesn't prevent employers from just decreasing their hours until women quit or have no hours left. So that's a really good workaround for employers to not follow the laws around working with women who require any special accommodations to meet their doctor's visits and other things like that. We'll just take you off the schedule. So other issues for food insecurity is a really big issue with a lot of the families that I work with. And the County Assistance Office has rules about your attendance to make it in for periodic reviews. They also have rules about how many hours you can work to receive those benefits and how many hours is too flexible. Basically, the flexibility of my clients' schedules decreases their ability to maintain access to their food benefits or to keep enough food in their houses. And so if they work a lot for 3 weeks in a row, their benefits may be decreased by the County Assistance Office, and then they work 4 hours, and over the course of a month, it may be that they've worked the right amount to maintain that benefit, but they're looking at the week-to-week pay stubs. So that's another really serious issue. I've probably gone over 3 minutes, so I'll let it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We are trying to move our testimony, so if you can just keep it to 3 minutes. I understand that you're reading another testimony into the record, but I know it's pretty tight, but we're trying to keep it going. So we've got some really great reports ahead and want to make sure everyone has ample time to present. Thank you.
Of course.
Yes.
My name is Madison Nardi. I'm a retail worker in Philadelphia, and I'm speaking on behalf of Tori Price. Unfortunately, Tori Price was unable to make it today due to her employer forcing her to come to work on her day off. Wow. So I will be reading Tori Price's testimony.
Thank you.
My name is Tori Price. I work at Target. I'm a lifelong West Philly resident, and I'm a member of 1PA. Thank you for having me today. I am here because I can't keep living this way. We'll never stop being the poorest big city in the country if we don't make the jobs that are here now service jobs, good jobs. People say retail workers are teenagers who don't really need the money. I'm only 19, but my paycheck supports my disabled mom, my 4 brothers and sisters, and my 2-month-old niece. There's no way to support a family of 7 or do any financial planning when my hours range constantly from 20 to 35 hours per week. We have an eviction notice on our house, but I don't even know what rent I can afford, so how can I look for a new apartment? Even though I never get 40 hours officially on my schedule, I get called in nearly every single day I'm supposed to be off. I can never say no because I need the hours, and if I do say no, they won't ask me again, and they might even punish me by cutting my hours in the next pay period. But sometimes I don't have the car fare to get from my house at 56 and Cedar to work on 12th and Chestnut. So I have to walk. I'm constantly tired, and I can never plan anything else. When I get called in, I have to miss doctor's appointments last minute, and I can't help take care of my niece while my sister's in school. On top of that, I have to clopen. I'm a young woman going home to West Philly, and I don't feel safe going home late at night. I get home at 10 or 11 and have to leave back out at 4 in the morning to be there at 5. Last week, my manager asked me to stay for a double and promised me to requisition me for a bag of candy. That just goes to show how much our companies value our time. Our time counts. In other cities, Target has already had to give its workers a fair work week, so we know they are capable. I am calling on City Council to recognize 130,000 of us that are tired of being exploited, tired of not being to be able to pay our bills, and tired of the businesses that get rich by keeping us poor. It is time for City Council to stand together with workers and pass a fair work week in Philadelphia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ms. Blair, I had one quick question because I think, all of us in this council chambers really supported early childhood, pre-K, and want to see families access that. Could you just clarify for us, because I think this is something that is maybe a little bit technical, but when you say that not having a predictable schedule means that individuals may not be able to qualify for subsidies that they would otherwise be eligible for, could you tease that out a little bit, explain that to us as briefly as you can, of course?
Sure. When a woman starts receiving TANF, she signs a paper that basically is an agreement between the county assistance office and that person so that they can receive that cash assistance benefit. As the women I work with transition off of the break that they get associated with pregnancy, they're mandated to return to a welfare to work program. And in order to meet the requirements, they need to be in education or training a certain number of hours per week. The City of Philadelphia partners with a lot of different businesses through their career programs that these women are mandated to attend, and those same employers do not give the women enough hours to maintain that benefit. So 1 week they may only be working 7 hours, but they have to be working 10 hours if they're not in school, or 20 hours a week if they are, 10 hours if they are in school and 20 hours per week if they're not in school, in order to maintain the benefits that allow them to keep their child care assistance. Does that answer your question? Yeah, that does
help. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody on the panel, Principal Damon, Pastor Thompson. Thank you so much to all of you, and especially Madison. Thanks for reading Tori's statement into the record. Could the clerk please call the next panel? And I just want to acknowledge the presence of Councilman Taubenberger. Thank you very much for being here.
Nancy Walker, Chief Deputy Attorney General, Fair Labor Section, on behalf of Josh Shapiro, Attorney General of Pennsylvania, Nadia Hefka, and Anna Haley.
If you could just introduce yourself and then proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Nadia Hefka from Community Legal Services, and I submitted a written testimony. I just want to kind of point to some of the highlights in particular. We serve 9,100 low-income Philadelphians every year at Community Legal Services, and we acknowledge that one of the main issues preventing our clients and our families from moving out of poverty are low wages. And so we agree with earlier statements made by other witnesses that our wages need to be higher in Philadelphia, and they need to be living wages. But I want to focus today about this issue about employers' practices where they demand employee scheduling flexibility to accommodate the needs of the business, but they offer no such flexibility to the worker and their family. And this exacerbates existing inequality that already disproportionately impacts poor families, and in particular, Black women in Philadelphia. I want to focus in particular about our more vulnerable families, in particular families with children who have special needs and families that are dealing with child welfare systems. We represent these distressed families regularly in our family advocacy and our disability practices, and our clients are often unable to maintain employment to support their families because their jobs do not provide enough flexibility. Our staff who represent children with disabilities in supplemental security income cases, SSI cases, see this phenomenon all the time when a parent, usually a mother, has to drop out of the workforce because a job cannot accommodate the family's needs. Although a part-time job would otherwise seem perfect for a parent of a child with a disability, a job that requires the parent to be on call or regularly changes schedules without any notice may cause the parent to choose between the job and a standing medical or therapy appointment. Just for example, depending on the severity of the disability, a child on the autism spectrum disorder or with a mental health issue typically needs to go to therapy 1 to 2 times per week and may have a medical or psychiatric appointment once a month. With constantly changing scheduling, the parent of this child will have to either miss 1 to 3 days of work per month, which vocational experts consider not being consistent with employability, or they would miss 1 to 3 appointments per month. And that carries real risks for a child's health. On top of that, it's already difficult enough for parents of children with special needs to find after-school or daycare programs. Those problems are exacerbated if the parent has unpredictable and ever-changing scheduling and care needs. So I want to tell you about 2 of our clients. These are real people with these real-life impacts. One of our clients is a single dad who works part-time. His son is having behavioral problems and needs therapy once a week and tutoring once or twice a week. To prevent his son from missing school, he sets these appointments for 3:30 or 4 o'clock p.m. You have a short window of time between when school ends and when a doctor's office closes. So, but when he's unexpectedly called in to work during those times, there is only one other person, a neighbor, who is capable of handling this child who has behavioral issues. That neighbor is not always available or might not be available to take on that child on a day with no notice if the schedule changes that day. Another client had to quit the workforce because their child with sickle cell had episodic pain crises that flare up a few times a year with either needing to stay at home or hospitalizations if it's severe enough. And the child is young enough that has to have a parent present during hospitalization. You can't leave a child in the hospital alone when they're at that tender age. That parent had to leave the workforce completely because of an inflexible job that would not allow sufficient time off to accommodate. In addition, these families face a secondary dilemma. If they miss a doctor's appointment, they are worried that DHS will be called for neglect. We routinely see cases of families being brought to the attention of the child welfare system by medical providers for failure to attend medical appointments, even when there might be a good reason. Medical providers are mandatory reporters if they believe abuse or neglect is occurring, but this is a subjective standard, and national studies have shown that more Black families are reported to child welfare agencies than white families in the same circumstances. DHS involvement not only could lead to children being removed from their families, but it also adds even more meetings and appointments to that stressed family's calendar. A CLS client recently had 2 children placed in foster care, and her fast food job hours varied all the time. She had 2 children to visit and 2 more at home. The 2 children in foster care were in 2 different homes, and she had separate visitation schedules for each child. The children in foster care also had medical needs, and because she was unable to attend enough appointments, of the medical appointments and family visits for the children in foster care, she asked for a flexible schedule from her employer. That didn't work. She ended up losing her job, and she ended up losing custody of the 2 children who were in foster care. Another recent client works in a restaurant, and not only do his hours vary widely, but he only gets his weekly schedule days before his work week starts. So when our child welfare agency, DHS, expressed concern about returning the child to him because the child has standing medical appointments for her special needs. And so this is something that's recognized by child welfare experts as well, and it affects parents in real ways when they don't have flexible enough work schedules to work around standing medical appointments. So these issues have real impacts, and these vulnerable families need more flexibility, not less. They need the ability to turn down a change of schedule if it interferes with family responsibilities. They need the ability to plan several weeks ahead. Instead, they are punished for lacking flexibility by getting fewer hours, or they are fired. A more humane system would recognize that workers are human, and humans have needs, whether their own or their families. Again, we thank you for looking into this issue, and we think that there are a number of ways that we would be glad to work with City Council in terms of crafting protections for workers, in particular protecting them from the kind of retaliation we already heard about earlier today, and the ability to turn down a change of hours, and the ability to get additional hours if necessary before they're offered to a new person in the business.
Thank you so much, Ms. Walker. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Gim and Chairwoman Reynolds Brown and members of council. My name is Nancy Walker, and I am Chief Deputy Attorney General, and I head up the Fair Labor section at the Pennsylvania Office of the Attorney General. And in that section, we support working men and women and employers that abide by the law. I send Attorney General Josh Shapiro's regrets that he could not be here today. He had other commitments, but with your indulgence, I'd like to share just a few comments from the Attorney General.
Thank you.
Thank you for holding this hearing today to discuss how job scheduling issues affect working people and their families in Philadelphia and across Pennsylvania. As Attorney General, my duties require me to travel across the Commonwealth. Everywhere I go, I meet low-wage workers in the retail and service industries who struggle to feed their families, pay their bills, care for family members, and further their educational goals. Each story I hear has common threads: low hourly wages, unpredictable work schedules which make it difficult to find reliable childcare or to schedule appointments, take classes, and attend children's school functions, on-call scheduling which forces parents to arrange and often pay for childcare even when they do not end up getting called into work by their employer, being sent home from shifts early and, as a result, earning less than they expected, and ever-changing work weeks and work hours that enforce part-time work, making earnings so low that workers are forced to choose between basic necessities. These struggles leave working women and men little opportunity to get ahead. These stories are real and painful, and we must find lasting solutions, and conversations such as the one you're holding today are important steps toward finding those solutions. Recent studies indicate that nearly 100,000 service sector workers in the Philadelphia area, 2/3 of them report unpredictable work schedules that fluctuate from week to week. 62% have little or no advance notice of their work schedules. 29% are forced to deal with on-call scheduling and other fluctuations, and nearly half experience weekly income changes. In addition to scheduling fluctuations, nearly a quarter of all Philadelphia service sector workers are scheduled to work less than 20 hours per week, despite being available to work far more. Insufficient hours and low wages leave many families struggling simply to survive, with little or no opportunity to get ahead. Women are particularly hard hit by these practices. The National Women's Law Project reports that nearly 6 in 10 low-wage workers are women. many of whom bear the additional burden of primary family caregiving responsibilities. Working mothers are primary wage earners in 42% of families with children, and studies indicate that almost 13% of Pennsylvania women live in poverty. Fair scheduling is crucial for single mothers, many of whom have difficulty making childcare arrangements for evening, weekend, and overnight shifts, especially when schedules change from week to week or even at the last minute. Women of color fare even worse. They are overrepresented in low wages and childcare responsibilities. These harmful scheduling practices contribute to a cycle of poverty from which few low-wage workers can break free. We must change this part of corporate structure. In the past few years, attorney generals across the country have been instrumental in influencing the creation of fair scheduling policies with several major retailers. Attorneys generals have joined together to send letters to some of the nation's largest retailers seeking information about their on-call scheduling practices and expressing concern about the impact of on-call scheduling on workers and their families. As a result of these efforts, several of those large retail chains agreed to end their on-call scheduling practices, and some further agreed to provide employees with work schedules at least 1 week in advance of the start of their work week. Fair scheduling practices by these employers change the lives of tens of thousands of workers across the country and prove that businesses can do well while doing right by their employees. More predictable work schedules and hours benefit employers as well. They can lead to increased worker satisfaction, resulting in less employee turnover and less time spent training new employees, thereby increasing overall productivity. Working women and men deserve predictable hours and decent wages. I support the efforts of this committee and look forward to working together to find ways to support workers in Philadelphia and all of Pennsylvania. Respectfully, Josh Shapiro.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome, Professor Haley. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, everybody. My thanks to Chairwoman Gim and the committee members for the chance to provide testimony. I'm Anna Haley Locke. I'm an associate professor at Rutgers University who studied conditions of low-wage and hourly jobs from both employer and employee perspectives for the last 16 years. With Professors Susan Lambert, Kristen Harknett, and Daniel Schneider, I know you have testimony submitted from Kristen and Daniel. I'm on the research team funded by the City of Seattle to evaluate the implementation of Seattle's new scheduling ordinance. Professor Lambert and I are investigating the implementation process from the employer's side. You have my written testimony, but I'll touch on the high points. As Harknett and Schneider have found for Philadelphia's hourly service workers, much like their counterparts around the U.S., face a range of scheduling practices in their jobs that destabilize both their income and their ability to combine work with dependent care and other obligations. Philadelphia hourly service employees surveyed reported an average 14-hour fluctuation in their total hours from 1 week to the next. A third got a schedule less than a week in advance. 29% had worked on-call shifts in the last month, and 16% had a work shift canceled. 77% of workers in Harknett's and Schneider's study wanted more stable and predictable schedules. And of the 47% who worked fewer than 30 hours, 74% wanted more hours. Research has well documented by now the negative impacts of employer-driven schedule instability for workers and their families. Professor Lynn Posey-Maddox and I found that employer scheduling practices shape parents' engagement in their children's schools. That is, whether and how they participate in school and classroom activities. Important for both kids and their schools, as Dr. Damon's testimony so eloquently shared recently. Women in hourly service jobs, all primary caregivers for children in our study, faced a lack of input into their work schedules, having to provide employers far in advance notice of their own absences, even as their employers posted worker schedules at the last minute. Employers requiring them to extend their shift end times at the last minute, and uncertainty about how many hours they would get to work a shift with frequent early send homes. Because of their work schedule instability, the women typically had to ask their employers for time off of work, often 1 or 2 weeks in advance, and often unpaid, to participate in school activities. For example, Mary waited tables at a national restaurant chain while raising her 2 young nieces. Her work schedule was posted for a week at a time, a few days before the work week began, and it was just a guesstimate. After posting it, her employer would frequently adjust her hours. This is the story we've heard repeatedly so far in testimony. Mary said there were often, quote unquote, days that I started at 11 and was done before noon. Yeah, so those are the days you want to cry. If it's slow and nobody's coming in, they cut the floor, meaning the staff. This meant Mary rarely knew when she would be available to be involved with her niece's school, and because she was desperate for whatever work hours came her way, she had to prioritize last-minute chances to work over planned school participation. Vicki, a customer service representative at a retail store, explained that she could, quote, never honestly tell you when I'm going to be out of work. If we get slammed 5 minutes before we close, we still have to help everybody that's there. If Vicki declined to stay until all customers were served, even when her shift was officially over, she said her employer would give her fewer or less desirable hours later on. That is the retaliation story we've also heard today. Because of this, Vicki repeatedly sacrificed plans to attend her children's school events. This employer's practice also made for some very long days, which sapped Vicki's energy as well as availability for participating in school events and even basic family life. Now, as concerns grow about effects of unstable scheduling on workers and families, employers sometimes respond by describing volatile conditions they face in running successful businesses and the resultant need for what's called labor flexibility through using scheduling practices like last-minute schedule posting and changes, on-call shifts, and tight shift spacing, clopenings, as they're known. And it is no doubt really hard running a business in the service sector. Yet research suggests that demand for labor is not vastly unpredictable in the service sector. This is partly because business demands and in turn the need for labor exhibit a fair amount of constancy over time. My full testimony provides citations for research on all of this. And because today's forecasting systems, including scheduling technologies, the predictive scheduling that was discussed earlier, can anticipate much of the remaining variation in demand. In addition, some variation corresponds with business decisions that can be substantially planned. And not all firms in the service sector rely equally on labor flexibility practices, even when sharing the same operating conditions. Professor Susan Lambert's and my research over many years in the retail, restaurant, hospitality sectors has found striking variation in how frontline managers schedule workers. And in our case study of big box retailer Costco, we found that while managers carefully tracked labor cost to sales ratios like their retail competitors, when customer traffic was slow in a given department, employees were rotated to busier departments rather than having their hours cut. Costco also guarantees minimum hours to its regular employees, 38 for full-time, 24 for part-time, and thus incentivizes managers to concentrate hours on existing employees. Such strategies are not limited to large footprint stores. I know that's come up too about small versus big business. In my study of restaurant employment that included sites of 2 national low-end chains in suburban Seattle, Chicago, and Vancouver, Canada, staff reallocation was also used to deal with business fluctuations. In Vancouver, managers at sites of 2 chains covered by a quote-unquote minimum daily pay law, so it's a sliver of what's now larger fair work week ordinances, carefully forecasted the need for labor onto schedules in advance, and then when shifts came up slow, they assigned waiters deep cleaning or food prep tasks. In contrast, managers of sites of the same chains in Seattle and Chicago, which were not covered by such regulation, reduced or canceled shifts at slow times. I'm wrapping up. The problems caused by unpredictable schedules are real and they're considerable. We have a bevy of data established at this point on this. This is not up for debate. They are considerable for many American workers and for many Philadelphia workers, as Harknett and Schneider have found. It is heartening that Philadelphia City Council is taking the opportunity to listen to input from a range of stakeholders, very much including labor and business and government, everybody, to devise solutions that may better share workplace risk and reward among employers and employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Good afternoon, ladies. Thank you for your very informative and, quite frankly, deeply provocative information. It's an eye-opener and an affirmation in many ways. We have to trust and then verify, and you verified a number of realities here. I just wrote a note to one of my staff asking them the question that you've addressed, and that is, when we know that New York and Chicago and Seattle...
Chicago's pending, but Seattle, San Francisco, New York City, Oregon and states. Connecticut's having a hearing today. Right, they had it at 11 o'clock this morning.
So there are some municipalities that have actually figured this out. And the question for me always is, and what takeaways can we pull from those already existing municipalities that sort of figured it out, and what lessons can we learn from them as we move to go to your last sentence here, as we move to explore ways to address this challenge. So if you have any other type of data or instructions that might guide us and inform members of council as to how Seattle figured it out, that would be very useful for us. And if you could forward that to the chair at your convenience, that would be terrific.
So there's a reference in my testimony. Unfortunately, we are just wrapping up the baseline report. So we collected data from employees and employers in Seattle prior to the activation of the new ordinance of this past year. That report, which shows kind of the nature of the practices, the variation, is embargoed for a few more days. It will be out at the end of the week. I wanted to talk about it today, but I couldn't yet.
I understand embargo.
And then we are going back into the field in Seattle this summer at the 1-year mark after implementation, and that's when we're going to know, the focus is really understanding from my side and Susan's side, understanding employers' experiences with the law and their implementation of it and how they've dealt with it.
Sure. It's always very, very instructive to see how the municipalities figured it out.
Absolutely, yes.
Please thank the Attorney General for registering his important voice. It matters, and to know that he's facing this across the Commonwealth underscores why it's important for us as a legislative body to take a real good look at it. And I'm not surprised to learn at all that African American women are always, I don't care what the factor is, I don't care what the metric is, African American women have to walk on water and fly to be equal. And in an instance like this, it's not a surprise that they are most negatively impacted by the realities we're talking about this afternoon. So all of your testimony was quite important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Ms. Walker, I just had a quick question, and then I want to open up if there are any other council members who have questions. Could you just, because I think it's important that the attorney generals of multiple states have been looking into this, could you explain a little bit about what on-call or on-demand scheduling is that triggers this type of interest?
So what on-call scheduling is, Councilwoman, is when an employee is asked to be available during a certain amount of time. So for example, on a Saturday, an employee is asked to be available from 10 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That employee may or may not be called in, but they have to be available to take the call and to get to work very quickly. Where this is really particularly detrimental, I mean, that may not affect, I have a teenage daughter, that may not affect a teenage daughter, but for people who have to make family child care arrangements, they're often paying for child care during that 6-hour window, even when they're not called in, because they have to make arrangements to cover the responsibilities at home. So it can be very, very detrimental. And that is a fairly typical practice in the retail industry.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. And Dr. Haley, or if you could, as I think other people are saying, we are now doing more of a deep dive into Philadelphia. And I think in particular, it's understanding how Philadelphia is measuring up against more national trends. And I think what you're saying is that we're mirroring a lot of what we already know is happening across the country, minus any kind of minimal standards of or assistance to help businesses understand what the floor is on this issue. And can you explain a little bit? I mean, I think it's really important for folks to understand that there have been policies that have been moving in other places. The sky has not fallen on those. We still have major retailers and others who are doing business well and adapting to this issue. And this is part of some of your research, is that correct?
Yep, Absolutely. Yeah, and these are new policies, and they're rather complex, right? So Susan and I are the first to acknowledge that they're fairly distinct mechanisms from, say, a minimum wage. That's a flat number. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces to these. I think I praise Seattle. I've been most involved with that process in being really inclusive with the business community, with labor, with workers, with managers, labor lawyers, scheduling software companies, and coming together to work through the nitty-gritties, to use a technical term, of policymaking through administrative rule setting. And so I think that if there is a success story to be found there, and again, we're still actively researching, I think part of that will be through this process of bringing, and it was echoed in other testimony earlier, really bringing folks together to work through the issues. And we have a definite problem that's just well established at this point. So let's figure out, let's work this out together. And again, there are lots of, all these different kinds of practices, the just-in-time scheduling, there are all different kinds of ways of doing it. So to nail that down and reduce the liability to families, it's a bit complex. And so I think having all hands on deck is a good thing.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for your testimony. Thank you. Can the clerk please call the next panel?
Deneen Woodbury, Vanessa Fields, Rosemary Hall, and Dr. Kevin Johnson.
Thank you all so much for your patience. I really appreciate it on this important issue. Thank you. Dr. Johnson, did you want to start? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and to the council members who are here, and to my OIC board member and Councilman Al Tautenberger. Glad to be here. My name is Kevin Johnson, and I am privileged to serve as the President and CEO of Philadelphia OIC, but also as pastor of Dare to Imagine Church. I come to you today because I support making sure that we have legislation that takes care of those who are on the front lines of making sure that we have a strong economy. On January 8th, 1964, President Lyndon Baines Johnson introduced what is now known as the Economic Opportunity Act in response to the national poverty issue. In this act, President Johnson sought to create what we now know as the Great Society. Ironically, at the same time, Dr. Leon Sullivan started Philadelphia OIC, or what we know as Opportunities Industrialization Center. Since taking the helm of Philadelphia OIC, our mission has really been the mission of Dr. Sullivan, and that is to eliminate poverty, unemployment, and illiteracy here in the city, but also, in the words of Dr. Sullivan, to help people help themselves. Since taking the helm in January 2015, our job placement rate has grown to nearly 80%, and our revenues have increased from $1.3 to $4.2 million. We have added such industries beyond just hospitality of banking, construction, energy, and technology. And while these are great achievements, there is something about this story that is incomplete. As I make my way around the city, and as I hear people talk about the impact that Philadelphia OIC has had upon their lives, I'm told of how a mother or a brother or a grandparent was able to get a new lease on life and secure full-time employment that helped them provide for themselves and for their families. But what I also hear are from students who come back, graduates rather, who come back to Philadelphia OIC, who are part of that 80% who have received the job. They come back and they share with me some 3 to 6 months later, citing unemployment due to their being either seasonal or part-time workers. Yes, I look at this as a serious crisis, because if Philadelphia OIC is in the business of addressing poverty here in the city, we cannot address poverty if we don't have a fair work week for all employees. With employees receiving their schedules a week or less in advance, we have a trained and educated workforce that is not able to plan for or respond to life's uncertainties. We are talking about single parents who must plan for childcare. We're talking about guardians who also have to care for their family members and working to meet the needs that come with it. We are talking about families who must meet rent, pay bills, purchase groceries, and afford the uncertainty of a week-to-week work hours. Yes, we're talking about women of color. We're talking about all women and communities of color who are disproportionately affected here. And while we're talking about this, we are talking about businesses that must be concerned about the whole society. And what we have found is that more businesses are focused on the bottom line and making profits than they are about the people and helping to grow our region and our economy. And so I come to you today to share with you that as we look at growing our economy, we have to grow it with families that are of interest to us. It matters here in Philadelphia because when you look at the retail industry, food service, hotel employees who are on the front lines greeting guests to our city and ensuring that visitors spend money in Philadelphia. To be clear, this $989 million only accounts for the meetings and conventions and doesn't take into account the domestic and international tourism, along with just the everyday impact that this workforce has on our economy. Simply put, a livable wage and regular hours are the least we can offer a workforce that has helped position Philadelphia as a leading destination and city across this country. And so I'm calling upon business leaders. I'm calling upon city council. I'm calling upon everyone here in this city to address these issues so that we can make sure that families can provide for themselves, so that we can make sure that mothers don't have to choose between taking care of their kids and going to work, so that we can make sure that every person is taken care of here in our city. This bill, as we look at it, and you've heard all the information about San Francisco, Seattle, New York, Oregon, and so many others, while those states have moved forward in a very productive way, Philadelphia is the birthplace of America. Philadelphia is a place that has created greatness, and it's time for Philadelphia to be a leader and to make sure that we are part of the change, and we're leading this change across this nation. Thank you so much. It's time for a fair work week for all families.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome. Thank you so much for your patience.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rosemarie Halt, and I am the Senior Director of Policy for Maternity Care Coalition. As many of you know, Maternity Care Coalition has a long history of working in underserved communities to improve maternal and child health and well-being. What you may not know is that the idea of our original Mommobile program arose out of a City Council hearing on infant mortality nearly 30 years ago. The lack of fair scheduling regulation is an economic barrier that disproportionately impacts our families. For pregnant and parenting families in Philadelphia, the impact is even greater. With over 60% of children ages 5 and under in Philadelphia living below the 200% poverty level, it's even more critical. Women are disproportionately impacted by chronic underemployment. Race, ethnicity, and educational level compound these effects and amplify their impact on young children. Children's well-being is further threatened by the exposure to the adverse childhood events, which was mentioned earlier in the testimony. Alarmingly, 1/3 of families report experiencing chronic stress over their work week schedules. Balancing childcare with unstable work schedules make it hard for young families to pay the bills, let alone spend quality time with their children. Unpredictable work schedules make it difficult to access quality childcare, and currently in Philadelphia has only 11,100 subsidized childcare slots for children ages 0 to 5. However, unpredictable work schedules and income variations can change eligibility for subsidies. In addition, very few child care centers are open in the evening or overnight, so families are often forced to secure and pay for babysitting. Oftentimes, part-time workers' shifts are cut short or canceled at the last minute, and parents lose income and are left still obligated to pay for child care. One client described her exhausting work week this way: I work 2 part-time jobs to support myself and my 3-month-old baby. My one employer is constantly rearranging my schedule at the last minute and often shorting shifts. I pay for public transit to work, whether it's for 3 hours or 6 hours. I have to pay for babysitting for my evening job, which sometimes costs more than what I have earned. I am trying to breastfeed my baby, and one employer will accommodate pumping at work, but the other won't. So often, I don't eat during my break so I can pump. I don't know my work schedule until it's posted on Sunday. I've missed several well baby checkups because both employers will not accommodate my time off request for medical appointments ahead of time. I feel overwhelmed most of the time, but I will keep trying to be a good mom. With the fair scheduling resolution, Philadelphia can continue to lead the way as many family-friendly cities have already done. In ensuring steady, sustainable, and flexible work weeks, this resolution will enable families to stay emotionally and physically healthy and children ready to learn and thrive. The fair scheduling resolution is an investment in Philadelphia children and families and an opportunity for the city cannot afford to miss.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you so much. Welcome, Ms. Fields. Thank you. Commissioner.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Vanessa Fields, and I'm speaking this afternoon on behalf of the Philadelphia Commission for Women. I serve as a commissioner and the chair of the Pay Equity Committee on this commission. The commission's focus is on improving opportunities for civic engagement and economic success in the lives of women, girls, and those who identify as female. As many of you know, Philly is the largest poor city in America. The majority of these poor households are headed by women. Unstable work schedules exacerbates these women's ability to effectively address their own health needs, ability to parent effectively, and to move out of poverty. As a retired labor leader and social worker with almost 30 years as a social worker at DHS, I am able to speak with some firsthand knowledge on this issue. Many workers in hourly low-wage jobs struggle to manage their lives while navigating unpredictable work schedules. 75% of workers with unstable work schedules report having insufficient time for their children. A good education is a key step out of poverty. A parent's involvement in their child's education is key to academic success for students. However, when their parent has no control over their work schedule, it makes it difficult to participate in the child's school activities. Many of these jobs with unstable work schedules request 2 weeks' notice for leave time. However, schools often don't provide this much notice regarding parent-teacher night or report card meetings. Parents who work these schedules are often relying on friends and neighbors for childcare. This often unreliable network can affect quality and stable care for children. If the parent uses a child care agency, there is often unexpected child care costs. For example, there are additional fees for late pickup of a child, early drop-off of a child, and evening child care services. Unstable work schedules are often low-wage hourly jobs. Therefore, there is a struggle to support a family, which requires the need for a second or sometimes even a third job. But due to the unpredictable work schedule, a worker is unable to schedule interviews for another, hopefully better paying job. Lastly, the unpredictable work schedules make it difficult to schedule medical appointments. This results in restaurant, fast food, and hotel workers going to work ill and exposing others to their illnesses, causing a health risk to customers of these businesses. We applaud Councilwoman Gim's leadership on this extremely important issue. In closing, Aristotle said, "Poverty is the parent of revolution and crime." Think about that for a moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, welcome, and thank you so much for your patience.
Hi, my name is Deneen Woodbury.
and I'm a resident of West Oakland and a mother of 2 children, Iana and Madeline, who are now 14 and 7 years old. I am a restaurant cashier and a member of the United Here Local 274 at the Philadelphia International Airport. But previously, when my children were younger, I worked as a cashier at a pharmacy. I've seen a lot of challenges of the service and hospitality industry. At the pharmacy, I never could count on regular hours or days off because there were no ground rules. I had no means of holding on to my hours or having a regular expectation of full time. I spent many nights worrying about whether I would have income at the end of the week to pay my bills. But because I needed this job, I also struggled with being afraid of saying no to certain changes in my schedule. I remember one day there was a big snowstorm. When I received a call from my employer that they absolutely needed me that day, there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I felt clear that saying no to this demand could compromise my job. I had to scramble to ask my boyfriend to watch the children, but then was forced to work a double shift with no notice and be away from them well past their bedtime. More recently, I was part of the crew that opened a new bar in a restaurant at the airport. Like with many other new restaurants, the opening months were very chaotic. We had many staff, but hours and days off changed all the time. None of us could depend on our hours or regular days off. I could make no plans with my children because I could not be certain of when I would be working. My fiance has a heart condition, and I was constantly afraid while I was on probation that I might lose my job if I needed to leave to take care of him. Fortunately, because my company was union, we were able to come together and force our rights and require the company to allow us to bid on set schedules, where our days off were fixed and extra work was voluntary. If we had not gotten a set schedule with advance notice of changes, I don't think I could have made it work as a mother trying to take care of her kids. It's almost impossible to keep my family stable when I don't know whether I need to pay for babysitting or daycare or taking the kids to the doctor. At the airport and around the city, there are so many people working jobs like mine who have no rights. They don't know their schedule week to week. They don't know how many hours they are going to get. They keep living like this because they are afraid to lose their jobs. People are suffering because of this. Myself, and my children have suffered because of this. As working people, we have to make ourselves available morning, noon, and night for our employers. At the very least, we deserve some ability to plan our lives or finances, our children's care, and have to basis for income that doesn't disappear at the last minute and throw our lives into disarray. Please pass the fair scheduling legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Woodbury. Thank you. Thank you. That is so deeply moving. I did have one quick question for Dr. Johnson. You know, you have been, and OIC in particular has been an integral part of the workforce development strategy by the City of Philadelphia. It's been a major initiative. They just launched a new Fueling Philadelphia's Workforce Talent. And I'm wondering if you feel like in some ways that you coming out in support of understanding like why predictable schedulings and stable types of work efforts, why is that particularly compatible with the workforce development strategy and vision?
Right. I speak for myself, I don't speak for the committee, but what I will state is this, is that when you're in the business of addressing poverty, you begin to see that there is a connection between the economics. And what I mean by that is that it's not just good enough for somebody to get a job. A person must have a job that they can depend upon. They must have hours that they can depend upon. And so otherwise, what we're going to continue to do is to create these cycles of poverty, and we're going to create more generations who are stuck in poverty. And so if we're really serious about making sure that Philadelphia does not remain being the highest rate of poverty in the largest big city in America with poverty, then we have to address from an economic issue, we have to address from an educational issue, and we have to address from a workforce issue. Otherwise, we'll be back here at City Council saying the same thing again because we have not tackled the issue the way we need to, but we need to tackle it so we can make sure that everybody can take care of their families. Just as the CEOs take care of their families, we have to make sure that those who work for us and who are on the front lines, that they're able to take care of their families too.
Thank you. And what would you have to say for people who feel like most of this is just about jobs and employment and, that this is really about, staying out of jobs and employment? We really don't want to talk about families and the impact that it has on people's actual lives and their ability to take care of others. Why is that message, like what more do we need to hear than it's just a jobs issue, stay out of it?
Yeah. What I would say is when you hear the word America, poverty should not be mentioned in the same sentence. And so if we are going to be serious about making sure this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and this is the land of opportunity, then it just cannot be for the 1%, but it has to be for the 90% that we have forgotten all about.
Thank you. And I think, Ms. Fields, as a member of the Women's Commission and as somebody who's been very active around women's labor issues, do you have some response to that, this idea that, there's only one way to look at workforce development and somehow predictable scheduling and stable work may be incompatible with workforce development strategies? You've done this work for also a long time. You've worked on helping women in particular move forward in the workplace. Could you talk a little bit about why it's important to have a stable employment and stable work life in order to be able to prepare yourself better for the workforce?
Well, that's a good question. Absolutely, it impacts on so many different areas, because when you think in terms of the fact that most of these households of poverty are women, and women are the ones, no matter what you say, women are the ones who take care of the children, take care of their elderly parents, sick sister, family members or whatever. So when women are in impoverished situations, it impacts not just them alone, but it impacts their whole neighborhood, the whole city, the world. I mean, it impacts on everything. And some of the discussion that has already occurred in terms of the impact it has on people's cognitive abilities, but stress. Because when you think of the type of stress you have to go through, trying to juggle, figuring out if I'm going to be able to pay the bills, will I have time to get some decent child care for my kids, and to take care of the elderly, because a lot of times you have a mother or a father living in the same household as, you have generations living in the same household. And so now you have other folk you have to take care of. So that's a lot of stress on a person also. So this impacts on so many different areas that ultimately impacts on, what happens in the city.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Ms. Woodbury, for your testimony, especially, it matters so much for us to hear from working moms, especially, you have a 14-year-old and a 7-year-old. You're very thoughtful about the fact that one is in high school, you need to pay attention, and the other's in elementary school. You want to be there as a parent, as a cheerleader for their lives. Can you talk more about how this juggling of this uncertainty is contributing or not contributing to your ability to just be so present for your own children?
I mean, I mean, as I stated earlier, the struggling goes beyond than bills and stuff like that. There's numerous occasions where though I get phone calls about my daughter, being in the hospital, just got finished having seizures. I can't leave because there's nobody, there to back me up. Or I had to pick up extra hours. Instance, I just got finished being sick. I cannot make doctor's appointment. I had to go to work being sick. I had to come in. I had to go for, stay a couple of hours for them to send me home. Hours-wise, ain't but so much I can say. It's hard, especially when it's not enough hours or even not being able to take care of yourself. And like they say, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of nobody else.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you for your patience. Could the clerk please call the final panel?
Reuben Jones, Rob Wonderling, and Donna Cooper.
And if this is the final panel for today's hearing. If there's anybody else who would like to testify, if you could just let our clerk know so that we can put that on the record and have the rest of us know about that. Thank you very much for your patience, Mr. Wonderling and Ms. Cooper. If you could just introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Okay. Good afternoon, and Councilwoman Gim, I apologize I wasn't here when you called my panel earlier. I appreciate your flexibility. My name is Donna Cooper, and I'm the Executive Director of Public Citizens for Children and Youth. And I want to thank the council members who have spent time here today. I know many council members have been listening to the testimony, and Councilman Gim, thank you for holding this hearing today about the impact of unpredictable work schedules on children and families in our city. PCCY is the only advocacy organization in the southeastern region of Pennsylvania that works on a whole child. And as you know, we deliver free health care services to children. In fact, beginning March 26, we'll enable over 800 children to get free dental care as part of our Give Kids Smile Week of Service. And we organize this free care because far too many children of working parents don't have dental insurance, or their coverage or copays make it impossible for them to afford dental care for their children. So how does this connect to why we're here today? Quite directly. In order for parents to make dental or doctor appointments for their children, they need to know what their work schedules are. It's as simple as that. Our job at PCCY is to do what we can to encourage elected leaders to do what they can to adopt policies that ensure every child, rich or poor, can thrive. That's why we've long been advocates for workplace policies that enable parents to be both good, productive workers and responsible and responsive parents. We're here today for the very simple fact that when a parent's work schedule varies by shift, raising healthy, stable children becomes more difficult. For families of limited means, the impact of children can be particularly burdensome and harmful. The good news is that most workers in this great city and this great nation can balance work and family because our national norm of predictable work schedules is in place. In fact, the vast majority of workplaces, both employers and employees, benefit from a common sense approach to scheduling that gives employees reasonable notice for shifts. In fact, it's sort of HR 101. Predictable schedules are a good workplace best practice that increases employee retention, boosts worker productivity, and drives down the cost of hiring and training. And on top of that, of course, they're an essential ingredient for a family-friendly company. I commend you for kicking off this discussion about the troubling anti-family norm that is far too common in our food service and retail sectors, where the poorest workers must juggle work and family circumstances and have the fewest resources to do so. The good news, again, is that a study conducted in Philadelphia among service employees found that 66% of all workers got their schedules at least a week ahead of time. And the largest share of those workers got their schedules 2 weeks ahead of time. But that still means that a third of the workers have less than a week notice for their schedule. That means thousands of employees in these sectors don't know from one day to the next what their schedule will be. In fact, while management in these sectors typically knows their schedules a month in advance, the frontline workers can't plan their child's doctor visits, child care, or essential responsibilities of parenting, as we've heard today. The Philadelphia civic, child advocacy, and business community routinely bemoans the challenges faced by our school district. But it's unclear how the district is supposed to boost student performance when they're saddled with the impact of family-unfriendly work practices that esteemed researchers have found negatively associated with young child's cognitive development and behavior problems. These findings make complete sense. For decades, we've known that stable, nurturing relationships with caregivers are crucial to the long-term development and well-being of children. When attachment patterns are broken by endless turnover of caregivers, no matter how well-meaning they are, children do not form the necessary trusting relationships that will enable them to grow, learn, and develop. Simply put, when a parent cannot predict their work schedule, they cannot put their child in consistent child care. As a result, the development of the young child will be stunted. The inconsistencies in child care undermine their cognitive and emotional development. With predictable schedules, some of these interruptions can be avoided. And not only does the lack of predictable schedules make child bonding impossible, it largely precludes the enrollment from high-quality child care. State requires using subsidized childcare to maintain 20 hours of regular work. Councilwoman Gim, you talked about this in the opening of this hearing. When hours and schedules fluctuate, causing the parent's income to change, a parent's capacity to maintain their eligibility for critical early learning supports puts their children at risk. And let me explain how this works in real life. I ran the city's largest welfare to work program in the 90s, where nearly 5,000 mothers were helped to enter the labor force and achieve family-sustaining wages. Among the top reason that women that we helped lost their jobs was the inability to manage the weekly changes in childcare arrangements needed to contend with unpredictable employer schedules. Now, 20 years later, it's long past time for those employers who vocally demand that single mothers get off welfare and become role models for their children by entering the workforce, for them to end the very practices that cause these responsible mothers to quit or lose their jobs because the workplace practices simply make it impossible for them to arrange reliable child care. When employers don't practice predictable schedules for employees, parents and children miss their pediatric appointments. Already, far too many children miss school because of untreated chronic illnesses like asthma that flare up when doctor's appointments are missed. With reasonable notice of a work schedule, a parent can negotiate with their children's health care provider for appointments. Without such a schedule, appointments aren't made, and if they are, they aren't kept. Not only does this harm children, it shifts the costs of unpredictable schedules right onto our overburdened healthcare systems. We regularly hear from pediatricians, including those at CHOP and St. Christopher's, that children miss appointments because parents don't have notice of their schedules. And of course, there's another untenable impact of unpredictable scheduling and irregular hours for parents, who are those attempting to learn a skill or a trade or get a degree so they can get a better job. We all know it's very hard to juggle parenting and a job without a schedule. Add to that the need to go to school and further your education, and the house of cards simply collapse. Let's be clear. If our goals for upward mobility for this city, where poverty is a norm for nearly half of the population, is post-secondary training, then our fate is sealed. It's impossible for a parent to add school to the mix without predictable scheduling. For employers who lament the shortage of qualified workers, for those who decry the number of families who rely on food stamps, it's time to remove every barrier to secondary training. Chief among those barriers is the parents' unpredictable schedules that make enrollment in training impossible. The fact is that other cities have found workable solutions for employees and employers, and they are not just one-off locations. The entire state of California, the 6th largest economy in the world with a GDP larger than India, Italy, or Brazil, has already passed a law that ensures employers tell their employees schedules in advance. So too have Oregon, New York, Seattle, and San Francisco. Each of these states and localities approach the scheduling requirements differently. Some mandate a 14-day schedule, others 10, still others 1 week. But they've solved the problem by requiring that others have solved the problem by requiring employers to pay employees more if they have an absence of a predictable schedule. We can learn from these states and cities about how to appropriately balance the role that government can play to reinforce positive workplace norms with the obvious needs of private employers. This is possible, especially when we look at that none of these places that have laws in place have come to a grinding halt, and none have had an exodus of retail or service sector jobs. Amazon is not fleeing Seattle, and neither is Apple, who 3 years ago expanded into that city. In fact, the changes you are discussing here today affect a very small segment of the workforce. Although the number of employers and employees will be small in comparison to the overall economy, the impact will be a godsend to these families, enabling them to enter and remain in the labor force as better parents and more responsible employees. Private companies may argue that they need to adopt new software, retrain their managers, or otherwise expend resources to make predictable schedules possible. In fact, these companies are already spending large sums of money recruiting and replacing workers because their outmoded, anti-friendly workplace scheduling practices cause unusually high levels of churn among their hourly workers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that the turnover rate among hourly workers is 4.5% a month, or 54% annually. They're losing half of their workforce annually. While the cost of replacing an hourly worker is less than replacing a professional manager, the cost is not insignificant. Kronos, a workforce analytics firm, estimates that the cost of turnover in the hourly wage sector is $1,500 per hire. This includes the cost of managers' time, training, and paperwork. Other companies have studied the problem and pegged the number higher at $2,000 to $4,500 per hire. For the average food service chain, it costs a minimum, that means for the average food service chain, it will cost a minimum of $12,000 a year to lose these workers, or as much at the high end of $36,000. Avoiding some or all the cost through predictable schedules seems like a better deal for business owners and their employees. Suffice to say that it's not a stretch to suggest that companies will save money by adopting predictable work scheduling. Further, for the national chains impacted by what you propose, the expense of new scheduling systems have already been borne by those companies. So in many ways, expanding the practice to Philadelphia spreads the cost of that upgrade across the company and essentially brings down the per unit cost for those franchises. I want to close by calling attention to the fact that employers in other cities fighting similar matters as those discussed here today rely on the tired old argument that workers will be harmed when the government attempts to lean in on their behalf. They said that when OSHA laws were passed, when minimum wage laws were first passed, and they will say it when this bill is discussed. They will try to make the case that somehow with predictable schedule, an employee can never call in sick so they can take their child to the doctor, or ask their boss for a day off to see their child in a school play, or let their supervisor know they need a shift change to meet their child's teacher or see their kid win a playoff. I hope you as city council members will actively rebuff these arguments, and that our corporate sector, represented by my friend here, Rob Wunderling, will not stoop to such obvious falsehoods. To suggest workers lose all flexibility when government mandates predictable schedules. In closing, to suggest that workers lose all flexibility when the government mandates predictable schedules will only be true in the very same workplaces that today fire parents who ask their employers for the flexibility needed in the regular course of parenthood. The government cannot turn a family-hostile employer into a family-friendly workplace. But the government can level the playing field in these sectors so there is no competitive disadvantage for employers who want to retain good parents as their workers.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cooper. I just wanted a point of clarification. You said that you ran one of the largest welfare to work programs and gave an example. And
yeah.
Could you just, I mean, for clarity, because I thought it was very powerful, talk more like why this idea that somehow predictable schedules or a stable work life setting the most minimal standards around that is actually compatible with helping people stay in the workforce, especially women.
Yeah, it was essential. I mean, the government spends a lot of money trying to move, particularly women, from public assistance into work. So, you know, we're spending about $3,500 or $5,000 per woman that we're trying to move to work. And in some places, $15,000 if she's completed a training program. Normally, employees who complete a training program are going into sectors with a predictable schedule. But the government is definitely spending, you know, between $3,500 to $5,000 to help women navigate into the labor force who are single parents. And I will tell you, the number one reason, it was actually 4,800 women, so nearly 5,000 women. And we had a 65% job retention rate. So of those 45% of the women who failed to keep their jobs, the number one reason that we were working on reemployment for them was that they couldn't make stable childcare arrangements. So they were missing work because one week their aunt could watch the kid for this schedule, but then their aunt couldn't watch the kid for that schedule when they had it the following week. Or they were on call. So you're working in a laundry and you have to do a double shift. And some people can navigate that and they'll take the second shift. But some of the women couldn't navigate that because there was nowhere for their kid to be. And if they had had notice of, you know, a week, which I think is at a minimum, or 2 weeks, which would be ideal, they can make childcare arrangements. But it is not possible in America for us to have the public narratives say that single parents need to enter the labor force and be less reliant on public assistance and food stamps if the labor force is so disorganized as to make it impossible to ensure the care of their children is in place.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your patience. Mr. Wunderling, please, if you could just introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Chairwoman Gim, and other members of council who have joined us today. My name is Rob Wunderling, and I really do have the honor and to serve with humility as President and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. We have brief remarks that I am submitting on behalf of a number of organizations, so I'm not going to read them, but I will list the organizations that I'm speaking on behalf of today, and that is the Pennsylvania Food Merchants Association, the Asian American Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia, the Manufacturers Alliance of the Greater Philadelphia region, Wawa, the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association, the Pennsylvania Retailers Association, the Greater Philadelphia Hotel Association. Chairwoman Gim, in this committee, you have a very unique leadership opportunity before you. With humanity, facts, evidence, and a keen ear to listen, I think you have a very unique opportunity to bridge ideological divide, to perhaps call a pause and a timeout to very narrow interest groups that have already staked out claims and positions on a particular issue, and to really understand how employers and employees can work together to build an awesome work environment for everyone. We share your interests. We want a vibrant, prosperous Philadelphia where every citizen has an opportunity to succeed. But inherent in that success, and I think this interesting moment in time, is the word flexibility.
Yeah, if we could just let Mr. Wunderling conclude his testimony. Thank you.
We would love to learn from California and from Seattle. We would love to learn from other locales that have engaged in this work, but we're smarter than them. We're better than them, and we can build a better process that engages the entire community. We're recommending a couple of steps in this process, because we presume, and we take you at your word, Chairwoman Gim, that this truly is the beginning of a process to find facts, to build, as my colleague Donna Cooper suggested, sound public policy for the city of Philadelphia. And so perhaps we should consider the following together. Our organization represents approximately 600,000 employees in the greater Philadelphia region. By the way, many of whom, about 60% or so, start their day in one zip code and move to another. By the way, this is always the issue when a local government perhaps moves in the form of ordinance on something that might be better left off at the federal or state level like California. But let's survey those employees, employers together. Let's find out exactly what is driving decisions for the employee and the employer. Second, and our chamber will offer this, we have over 150 human resource professionals that wrestle with these issues every single day. Organize a day-long hearing like this one. Bring them in. Don't rely on the filter of interest groups like this Chamber of Commerce or organized labor, but talk to human resource professionals, either under oath, on the record, or informally. But we think that would be sound public policy. You asked Pastor Johnson a question earlier, which he chose not to answer, and I think rightfully so, because he was here as a private citizen on leave from his employer, about what the administration's position is on this. We worked hand in glove with Mayor Kenney, Managing Director DeBaradinas, and Commerce Director Epps on creating a model employer program, a comprehensive workforce strategy for the future of this city. I think it would be totally appropriate to bring Managing Director DeBaradinas and Commerce Director Epps here at this table and ask them, how does this comprehensive workforce strategy, which is the Kenney administration's key initiative in this regard, align with or not align with this particular initiative? I think those would all be sound steps, might require a little bit more time, but then again, we're presuming this is not a rush process. We're presuming there isn't a bill in waiting. We're presuming that this committee takes its work significantly so and will be willing to work in a process of collaboration. Otherwise, we may not get it right. Otherwise, we will once again send a chilling message to employers from around the world that Philadelphia may not necessarily be open for business. And in the ultimate irony, Councilman Derek Green and I and Commerce Director Epps and others are fully engaged in a regulatory reform effort. We'd hate to rush the matter, have an ordinance passed that is defective, does not fully represent all that is good about Philadelphia, end up on our agenda at our Commission for Regulatory Review and possible repeal. Boy, that would be a tragedy and probably send a negative signal that we cannot do things better than the other states and locales that were signified before. We really applaud you, Chairwoman Gim. This hearing, this time, and this testimony is so important. We hope it's broadcast. We hope the conversation continues, but we do hope in earnest with a much wider range of perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councilmember Reynolds Brown.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Wonderling, help me with a few additional facts. You say that the chamber has how many members total?
We represent about 600,000 employees in the 11-county greater Philadelphia region. About 1/3 of those are in the city of Philadelphia.
And if not now, you can certainly provide it to the chair. Of that 600,000 employees, I would be interested in the breakdown, either by hard number or by percentage, of those that represent big box stores.
We'll get you that information. I don't want to hazard a guess, but about 85% of our membership roster is comprised of enterprises of 100 employees or less.
Mm-hmm.
So we represent
repeat that.
About 85% of our membership roster is comprised of businesses and organizations. We have about 500 not-for-profit members, churches, organized labor, a whole range of folks that care about growth and prosperity. But 85% of those have 100 employees or less, which obviously a mandated local ordinance unique to Philadelphia at this regard would be significant for those smaller enterprises, those entrepreneurs, those neighborhood-based businesses to be able to comply.
Has any member of your team had an opportunity yet to talk with, confer with, reach out to your counterparts in Seattle, Chicago, or Vancouver, Canada, to learn how they figured it out?
Yeah, we can provide you that information. As the chair knows, we've been working in unison on this issue for well over a year now, trying to gather information, what's happening in other states and other locales. I am interested to see if we can build upon the experience in Seattle. But one thing I would caution this body is we always know each municipality, each locale is completely different, whether it's in governance, Of course, Philadelphia is a county and a city. That isn't the case, say, for example, in the city of Pittsburgh, which is part of a bigger jurisdiction. And the tax structure and regulatory structure for each municipality is always completely different.
So while I agree with that, having been a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow who traveled to Chicago and San Diego and Detroit looking at how systems work for kids, there are a lot of takeaways we can pull when we're trying to, as this municipality, trying to figure out how we can do better. So there's great value in sitting down with others who sit in the same space that I do when we're looking at tackling a major public policy issue. Know that our office will indeed be reaching out to my counterparts in those municipalities. Please speak to a term I learned this morning, and I want to thank again Wendell Young for this teachable moment for me, predictive scheduling tools. What is your take on that term? Do you think it has value? Do you think it has merit? Do you believe that it, editorialize it? What do you think about that tool?
So I don't know the specifics of that particular tool. Ultimately, it's most likely going to be software increasingly guided by artificial intelligence that will create just-in-time employment opportunities for employers. That is subject for a whole different hearing. I would argue that this committee ought to take up the issue of robotics, artificial intelligence, and the disintermediation that is going to have on workers, not just in Philadelphia, but across the world. And so these tools, narrowly defined and more broadly being executed, are not on some distant planning horizon. They're being deployed and will increasingly be deployed throughout workplaces around the world.
Did you get a chance to hear the testimony
I did
of the
not.
professor from Rutgers?
I did not.
Gee whiz, Professor Anna Haley?
I did not.
Okay. My suggestion might be that you take a look at her testimony whereby she actually backed up and provided clear evidence of where taking on and embracing certain tools can actually help businesses thrive, as well as provide a remedy for families who represent the, what's the number you gave me? Help me out. It's the hundred thousands of employees that help make up the chamber membership.
Sure, these are all choices that business will have to make. I think what is always the case here, and again, if this hearing is going to result in very short order in a bill that's already being contemplated, then we really would ask that we would have grave concerns around this issue, that you pause and talk to very small neighborhood-based entrepreneurs and businesses that may not ever have the financial capacity, like a big box retailer, to deploy those systems, at least not right away. So they'll start making choices, and those choices probably at the end of the day won't be good for the working men and women of this city.
Point of clarification, Councilwoman,
Please.
if I could. Mr. Wendell Young, you said that the chamber represents 600,000 employees. So do you actually represent the employees, or do you represent the businesses that employ those employees? You're not a union, I assume, right?
Right.
Would that be accurate?
Chairwoman and Gim, that's an outstanding question. Unlike let's say a labor union where one has no choice but to be a member, our membership is completely volunteer. An organization chooses to join our organization, and under our membership, all of those employees have the rights and privileges of membership. Now, will there be employees within any organization, just like a legislative body? I'm sure there's some members of council that agree with you and some that don't from time to time. There will always be individual employees that roll up to our total membership rank, as well as members that don't necessarily agree with our agenda. That's what it means to be a chamber of commerce. We're a composite of this city and this region. We're not a narrow trade association like dry cleaners or accountants or whatever.
It's actually also what it means to be a union. So I think you said
Not at
that
all.
just because you're a business, you then, if the business signs up, you compel your employees to be allegedly represented. I think that's
No, again,
very
we're
different.
a totally
So I just
volunteer
want to be
platform.
clear that I've never heard I've never heard the chamber represent itself as an employee-represented
So again,
entity,
Chairwoman,
a
we're-
business-represented entity.
Again, Chairwoman, and
So-
for the record, and under the law, we're a private not-for-profit corporation, no different than Donna's organization, where people freely choose to join or not.
So I'm apologize, Councilwoman, I just needed to clarify because I've never heard the chamber represent itself as an employee-driven
Okay.
Right? I wasn't representing us as an employee-represented organization. I was suggesting, once again, for the record, that we're a volunteer, private, not-for-profit corporation. If a member chooses to, if an organization chooses to become a member, we grant the rights and privileges of membership to all their employees. We don't speak for the individual employee of Wawa. They're a private citizen who's employed by Wawa. But Wawa, by example, a member of this chamber, is opposed to this resolution as it's currently presented.
But the good news I'd like to put on the record is we've had multiple examples in City Council whereby we had to work closely with the business community to seek a remedy that became what Councilwoman Sanchez spoke about in her early remarks, a win-win. The lead bill was one, whereby with the predecessor at PCCY, Shelley Yanoff, my office, and HAPCO, we met for 2 years trying to figure out how we could have members of the chamber embrace the notion that children still getting poisoned was not acceptable, and we actually found a happy medium that moved the needle for children being poisoned by lead, as one example. And
Yeah,
then
so
my
again,
second-
if this is the spirit and intent of this hearing, let's do that. Let's take our time and build a process so that we can reach agreement.
And then my second example is with one of the organizations that currently is opposed to this bill, my menu labeling bill. I was told that
Good example.
I was actually told that the sky was going to fall. And at the end of the day, with 12 votes, there were members of the restaurant community and members of council who came back to me and said, you know, Blondell, actually the sky is not falling, and we're actually in a better place with citizens having that information when they walk into restaurants.
Another good example.
So
Could do the same thing here.
the point I want to underscore is that this is another ripe opportunity for members of the chamber and for those of us on this side of the table who care very much about making a difference for those that we care about. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman. Just for clarity, I think you mentioned that Wawa's is opposed to this resolution, as is the chamber, and I just want to be clear what the resolution actually says. It says that working parents and caregivers' schedules serve as a backbone to the stability of children's lives and the provision of childcare services, and whereas the scheduling of children's medical appointments and the availability of after-school care shape the parental work week. It says other things about the importance of children's access to caregiving, and that the difficulty of women in particular having last-minute shift changes that will impact childcare, that we value work within the service sector and are concerned and want to have conversations. So are you saying that you, the chamber, opposes all of that?
I'm saying we want to have a conversation. I'm saying that the first part that you described is
You
exactly...
mentioned that you oppose the resolution.
It's exactly
and that
stated in
Wawa's
my
opposed
testimony,
it.
and I'll read it now if you'd like me to, Chairwoman. And that is, more than ever, employers are implementing wellness, diversity, and flexibility programs that work in core values. That we want a vibrant and thriving Philadelphia where families' health and wellness, as well as opportunities to prosper, are paramount. So in the spirit of the resolution, we absolutely agree. What we want to continue is a conversation.
Okay, so you're clarifying that Wawa's does not oppose this resolution?
I just answered your question.
Okay. And then the question I have, I think in your testimony, you say that this is a discussion and a solution in search of a problem that does not exist. And I'm wondering if you could just respond to what message the chamber has to the number of testifiers you heard before you who do not represent, actually, I think, narrow interests. I think we represent, we tried to represent children's issues, parental issues, healthcare issues, workforce development issues, labor concerns. The Attorney General was here. I hope you don't think the Attorney General represents an extremely narrow interest as well, and has been working on behalf of workers' protections. Is there a message that the chamber has to respond to some of the many stories you've heard about the real-life concerns that people have when it comes to unpredictable
So I did not have the
schedules?
benefit of hearing all the testimony, so I'm not going to comment on specificity. I know that I can speak from personal experience that's current in my life. And so those stories hit home to me personally.
Which stories exactly? The
The
stories you heard
anecdotal
earlier?
stories that I arrived here about 2:30 p.m. And so don't presume because I carry a title and a role with an organization that we don't have empathy and we don't care deeply. I personally care deeply. But these are my private matters. That's why I'm not going to respond to questions that are going to try to not get to the matter at hand. And I came here in the spirit to represent organizations in the hope, as the resolution suggests, that this is a beginning of a conversation.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I just want to make it clear, though, your testimony says that you say that it's a solution in search of a problem that doesn't exist. And so I'm just wondering if, I want to be clear, I'm giving you an opportunity
testimony has
to
been
share a
submitted
message
for
to
the
the
record.
testifiers who came earlier. Councilwoman Quinones-Sanchez, I did also want to make sure that Mr. Young, that you had a chance to respond to as well to Mr. Wonderling's explanation that your comment was about AI, but I want to and if you want to come up, and then I'll let Councilwoman Quinones-Sanchez ask.
Yeah, I just think that again, I think today was enlightening. It is the beginning of a process, as I said in the beginning, and I think it's hugely important that we get informed. But words matter, right? And what you testified versus what you wrote on paper matter, because this is what's going to get distributed to our colleagues. And one of the things that you put on this, which I hope that you take back to your membership, because it makes it difficult for us to say, let's sit at a table and get a win-win. If the approach is, and I read it from your testimony, we also respectfully but emphatically oppose making a law that would make city government the maker of personnel policy for broader categories of workplaces. So when you put statements like that, there doesn't appear to be a willingness to do all of the things we're agreeing to, which is listen, get the facts, and get a win-win. See, to me, there's a win-win, and I'm a member of the regulatory committee too, and if one thing we're doing at that business roundtable is listening to all of you and accommodating you.
So we stand by the statement as written, but let me give an example, that if indeed this council wants to pass an ordinance that puts the local government in the position of increasingly becoming the human resource department through employers to employees, then that is a very interesting pattern that is emerging in the city of Philadelphia. Maybe there's a different policy discussion that, say, involves incentives, that involves a different way to create, portable benefits for employees and employers. There's a range of ideas. But if indeed the solution is something narrow, mandated, that increasingly says that there'll be some function of the city government that will really essentially be the human resource department, by the way, for mostly small enterprises, right, that'll be forced to comply, then we're adamantly opposed to that.
Well, I think, again, in the spirit of cooperation and mutual respect, we set up a business regulatory committee at the request of the business community to streamline, and we are listening. And as a result of that, last week, I think we passed 7, 8 bills to do that. But if we're going to agree that we're going to work through a process, when you make those kinds of statements, right, then you're putting a line on the sand. And so I just want for the fight.
No, we're saying that that's not a good solution for free enterprise and small businesses, but there are other ways that we can address this issue if we have the conversation.
I don't want to debate the small issue, because every single thing we've done here, whether it's sick leave, whether it's, everything we've done, we always throw the small businesses out there as the, we have been very clear in this council that we protect small businesses, homegrown businesses. We've done that. I'm just saying that when you draw a line in the sand in and you say, we cannot. Because on the one hand, you're selling to us, we got to defend small businesses and all these practices, right? Which means you want us to narrow the focus, right, to the bigger ones. But then on the other hand, you're saying if we do anything to tell the bigger ones what to do, we're still crossing the line. I'm just saying that words matter, and intent and spirit matter.
We agree.
And you know, as you know, there is no legislation on the table. There is a difference between a resolution and an ordinance. I'm sure the chamber should understand that, which was why I was surprised when you opposed the resolution. And again, you know, as you said, you know, even as the councilwoman said, my concern is a little bit about your disparaging of the discussion as a solution in search of a problem that does not exist. And so again, you know, we want to make it clear that the city council has been more than open in terms of welcoming the chamber in and making sure that you have something to say, and in exchange, we would expect that that same level is accorded when we're even having a discussion. But it feels like the chamber right now has submitted testimony that even shuts a lot of that down. And I feel like that's unfortunate, and it doesn't help, you know, move this forward.
I provided several precise examples on how we can create a process to continue the conversation, which I think is the spirit of the resolution.
So I wanted to give Mr. Young a chance to respond, because I wanted to clarify about whether your comment about software technology was really a reference to AI and robots handling a lot of the worries, and that this is an area that you were trying to direct us towards.
So Bob Wonderling wasn't here when I spoke, so I'll at least give him that. But your question, Councilwoman, was to what you called predictive scheduling, other similar methods. They have nothing to do with robotics or artificial intelligence. Absolutely nothing. That's a whole nother conversation.
That's what I said.
There is a number of different, they're not all called the same, but I usually refer to them as predictive scheduling software programs. The professor that was here earlier talked a bit about it as well, and I haven't read her testimony or her attachments, but I believe it's all in there. This stuff is not new. It's not some far-flung software that maybe companies could institute. They use it now. Every major chain and most of the medium and small companies that do business right now throughout this country, including Philadelphia, already use this stuff. And even if they don't, as I said earlier, there's the old school way of doing it. You know, even before the software was available and we had this, managers looked at the same numbers, because it's all about sales records and forecasts and budgets and how much labor they need, and then taking that information and writing a schedule, which is based on all that forecasting. So all the software does is build algorithms and allows you to do it quicker and easier. And since most of these companies are owned in the background by investor groups, they put really serious conditions on budgets in advance. They're telling you this quarter what you're going to be able to have in your budget for the next 2 or 3 quarters. It's not like the old days where, you know, people really did do it week by week. So that's just one aspect of it, though, and people shouldn't get hung up on it. There are all those other aspects. And the other thing I'd like to talk about very briefly is the HR thing. That is nonsense. All right? Absolutely nonsense. If it is too difficult for a manager or a corporation to tell their managers, you can do this and you can't do that, then I would suggest they're overpaid for what they do and they shouldn't be in those jobs. It is not too hard to follow instructions. They have to do it on so many other things, from building the place to operating the place to paying taxes to the city and everything else they do. It's real simple. You can't send people home once you've scheduled them, and you can't call them in and force them to come in and fire them. That's not an HR function. That's just following some rules.
Thank you so much for that clarification.
Can I respond to his first answer, if I might? Because I was responding to Councilwoman, her question about it. What I said, and by the way, I spent 10 years in the software industry. I wasn't disagreeing with Wendell as to current availability of software for time and attendance, for predictive modeling, for managing the human resource of an organization. What I was suggesting first is that generally speaking, for smaller enterprises, that if there is ever required change due to a change in law, that is going to require a modification to that software or a purchase of a new system. So that's a choice of cost and what you spend dollars on as an enterprise. I then went further and suggested, again, to be clear, not for today's hearing, but I think it's well within the purview of this committee, and I think Wendell and I would have a collaborative conversation around the future of artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, robotics, that is going to have a huge disintermediating effect on millions of workers around the world. That was what I said earlier.
Thank you. Ms. Cooper, could I ask you for some final thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you very much, councilpersons. I would say that one of the things before coming here today is I called some folks who are retail managers in chains. And I asked them, what's it like? Do you guys do scheduling? Do you not? These are management folks. And they said to me, look, my store managers, if they're organized, they give people schedules. Mm-hmm. If they're disorganized, they don't. And one of the challenges that we're trying to face here is a lack of capacity in the private sector to ensure quality management that's organized in a way that can enable people to work and parent. Scheduling software enables some of that to happen more easily. But the fact of the matter is that either the employment sector is going to regulate itself so that people can go to work and be parents, or they're going to see more unionization, or they're going to see the government engage. And this is happening because the private sector has been, these employers have been disorganized and have internal lack of discipline that is then costing families large consequences. And that needs to change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to open it up. Is there anyone else who is here to testify? So I want to say, first of all, I want to thank my colleagues on City Council who came here for the length of this hearing. Councilmember Reynolds Brown, you've been such an incredible leader on the issue of women's economic security, on making sure that all of our people are being lifted up. Not just the privileged few. And Councilman Green has been just a tremendous advocate on the regulatory nature of recognizing council has to streamline laws and businesses. We have to be strategic, and we've got to be able to come together to recognize that business interests are not incompatible with the public interest, and that is something that is a very key thing to do. I really want to thank all the workers who came out. On behalf of all of us in City Council, I thank you for your courage and your bravery, for telling stories that we don't often get a chance to hear, for speaking for other workers who couldn't be here because of their schedules or because they were, frankly, terrified of retaliation or pushback or punishment. Your voices matter in this hall. This is City Hall. This is the people's chamber. It belongs to you as much as it belongs to any of the lobbyists or any of the other groups who come through here. And I want to conclude by saying this was an important conversation that we are going to continue. We can do better. We have to do better. Our children need us. Our parents need us. Our neighbors need us. And this city needs us to seriously consider and change the ways in which poverty is lived and experienced. So I want to thank everybody. And especially to all my colleagues who were able to come earlier, Councilman Taubenberger, Councilman Heenan, Squilla, Quinones Sanchez, we're all working on this together. So it's seen that no one else is here to testify on this resolution. This concludes the business of the Joint Committee. And I just, again, thank you, council members. Thank you, Councilmember Reynolds, Brown, and Green. Seeing as there's no one here to testify on the resolution, this concludes the business of the Joint Committee on Children and Youth and Education for today. The public hearing on resolution number 180049 is recessed to the call of the chair. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. Thank you, Councilman Taubenberger.